All right, there we go. Recording in progress. Hey,
That's really cute.
everybody. I'm Justin. Pete's on here. Between the two
Good
of us,
morning.
we make up Twisted Skies. We are very glad that some of you could join us today from wherever you saw our little advertisement for this class that we try to do at least once a year. Last year was so busy, we actually ended up double booking in the same day. We did an AM and a PM class, and it was a gauntlet.
Yes, it
I
was.
I was determined that if we needed to do that, I would schedule it on a different day because by the end of that, my voice was trashed. Feel a little bad for the second class, but like I said, there is a lot of information in this. If you guys have any questions before we get started, please definitely feel free to use the chat feature. Pete is going to be helping kind of keep tabs on that. So his word is absolutely as good as mine. We are equals in this thing. Yeah, just give us a shout. If for whatever reason we don't see your message or we're like moving way beyond like whatever the question was, go ahead and unmute yourself and just chime in. I'm happy to be interrupted so that we can answer the questions. That's the whole purpose of this.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, if there are not any, then we will go ahead and yeah, Pete, I went ahead and I minimized my screen, so I'm not going to see if there's questions. So
Yeah,
just
no worries. I got it from here, so go
sweet,
ahead.
man. And then yeah, if there's anything, Pete, that you also want to chime in on as we go, man, I'm always happy to hear from you. So
You got it.
all right. Well, we're gonna dive in. Hopefully we get through this faster than 3 hours, but it's usually kind of how long it ends up going. If you got to duck out, I totally understand. And as I said before we got started, we will try to put this up on YouTube probably within the next few days. So let me click in and here we go. So the objective here is to basically make you more situationally aware of your surroundings in regards to weather and notifications. The more you know about weather, the more weather ready you will be. I feel like that's pretty straightforward, and it's definitely kind of like one of our tenets that we try to ascribe to. We actually, just as a bit of a background, we went through a process to become Weather Ready Nation Ambassador certified. So it's definitely something that, you know, we really try to bring people up to speed on these sorts of things. And also, I feel like when you're better prepared, you'll obviously have more time to take appropriate safety actions. And then if you do decide to be a spotter, then you can be safe while reporting weather conditions. So I am Justin. I founded this team back about in late 2015. I'm also a part of the Independence, Missouri Emergency Preparedness duty staff. I'm the Storm Spotter team lead there, part of the Situation Unit. I've worked on the membership task force, and I'm also Skywarn trained and CERT trained. For anybody that's not done CERT, this is just a little plug for that venture. It basically teaches you how to be prepared for like all disasters. It's just really good training for like yourself, for your family, and that's not just weather, but I mean literally all hazards. It's super great training. Tony's my wife. She would not want to be on screen, but she is kind of the backbone that keeps me going with things. She helps me kind of keep tabs on social media. She's like, "Hey, you got a message? Are you going to reply to them, or you just going to like let them hang?" But she keeps me firing on all cylinders. Pete, who's here, and his dog, who joined us.
Hi
He's
there.
my co-lead. He is a part of the Oak Grove emergency management team out there. And correct me if any of this information is outdated, buddy, but also a member of Jackson County Aries, Skywarn, and CERT trained with 30 plus years of experience regarding weather and such things.
I take it way too seriously.
We really don't. And then, of course, friends of the team like you guys, we've got people that are just fans, they follow us, or people that, will submit pictures or tell us, hey, this is what's going on. And they kind of participate in the process, which is super awesome. We like being able to get reports from around the area because we send those kinds of reports and information straight up to NWS Kansas City. So, you guys are definitely as much a part of this as we are. being our eyes and ears out in the field, because we can't be everywhere. I'm in Independence, he's in Oak Grove, and collectively we try to keep tabs on the very greater Kansas City region, as it were. I do need to get rid of that link though. We don't have a Discord anymore, but you can definitely certainly follow us across our different socials. You can find us at Twisted Skies WX across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. A quick acknowledgement to the Independence EOC. As a volunteer, they kind of helped me get started with this presentation back in the day. But yeah, it's just a plug for them. There are a ton of volunteers that do different things through the EOC. Depending on where you're at, there's, you can always come out to Independence to join. We do a lot more than just an Independence. If it's something that interests you, give me a shout. I'll put you in touch with our membership folks. What we're going to cover, this is sort of our itinerary, but we'll cover some weather dynamics, kind of, like what is a thunderstorm, kind of the storm buildup, how that works, breaking point into severe, which is classifying severe weather and being aware, severe storm mechanics, storm composition and features, and then burst events versus tornadic events. And then we'll kind of do a specific dive into a better understanding of tornadoes. We will cover radar, a crash course. I think that's always important for folks to know, whether you're a spotter or not, it's always good to be situationally aware. And then we'll get into some other things like statistics, what's the difference of different things, why those things matter, and just generally being informed and staying informed. And then we'll kind of wrap it up at the end. And definitely, if there's been a question that was just burning that you didn't want to ask during, let it rip at the end. We want to make sure everybody feels good about the information before we get going for the day. So we will definitely have a few funny graphics as we go, but this is an oldie but a classic here. But basically, yeah, we're gonna hit the ground running with this. So this is something that Pete brought to the team, and I really think that this is a good set of information. Pete, do you want to go ahead and run through those, man?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. These 7 weather laws kind of came together based on just some random information I found, other people talking, and just kind of something that I put together myself in terms of how to basically educate yourself. So to go through it, before any storm ever comes, educate yourself. I mean, education is going to be the number one piece here. Know the difference between myth and conjecture versus fact and reality. There's plenty of stuff you can see on Facebook or social media where people say this or that, and you really need to know your facts, your places. I mean, who where versus one person posting something versus the National Weather Service posting something. Know the difference. Having a plan is going to be one of the best things to do. A good place to start is Prepare Metro KC. I believe that is either FEMA supported or SEMA, the State Emergency Management. I can't remember which one.
They share a lot of the information from kind of the top down, and the Prepare Metro KC is information that's a little bit more specific to our area.
Okay. Know your geography. That sounds really stupid, but I'm kind of amazed as to how many people cannot point to themselves on a map. And it's not really meant to be a talk down to. It's just, know where you are. If somebody says there is a tornado headed to Olathe, what does that mean to you? I mean, does that mean, am I in the way, or is that far away to where I should pay attention, but, I don't need to seek shelter at the moment? Have more than one way to get yourself a warning. TV, weather radio, cell phone, dogs barking, whatever. Give me 1 second here.
Sure. I'll just pick up where he was there. But yeah, and this is all stuff that we'll definitely cover throughout as well. But having more than one way to receive a warning is imperative. It was brought to my attention recently by Joe Loria, actually, the lead guy, meteorologist from Fox 4, that weather radios have had some issues kind of nationally. Not that they're bad, but just to be aware, it's a technology, it can fail just like anything else. So having multiple ways of being warned is always good to go.
Yeah. The just having the more, obviously, that your phones can beep you to death at some point when 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 weather warnings get issued. Don't take that as a negative. I mean, it's good to have that, especially if you're asleep at night. It's really loud and annoying, but it'll wake you up for sure. Weather radio is a great thing to use. Certain weather apps, amateur radio, police scanners. I mean, even text messaging. There's an infinite number of ways that you can get. And later on, we can touch on maybe some of the ones that we prefer as well
Oh
too.
yeah, for sure.
Know your home. Understand where the safest place to go is. I mean, if you're not at home, where's the best place to go if you're at work, if you're at school, or on the road, wherever you might be. I touched on this a little bit, but understand that social media may not accurately reflect the situation. There's weather trolls out there. There are morons. There are people out there who overhype situations or post misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really kind of blown away at some of that stuff. I mean, but there are crazy people out there. And I know that there are a lot of people, especially during wintertime, they'll post models that show storms that could be 15 days out. And there's no way any of that kind of stuff can ever, verify. And then last but not least, accept that violent weather will hit you at some point. No one's ever going to come to your house and tell you there's a tornado coming. In the end, regardless of how many times we can wave our hands, yell, scream, whatever, it's all in your hands to do something about it. You got to make the decision. You're the one who has to take the action in terms of that. Pay attention, act quickly. If it looks threatening, take shelter, even if nobody has issued any kind of warning. Better to be safe than sorry. I'm a little bit more into that to some extent. If you ever see somebody these days who tell you that they didn't get a warning, I can't even begin to tell you how much crap that is, because it's almost impossible to not get a warning these days. I mean, if you lived in a farm 1,000 miles from anything, maybe I could give you the okay on that one, but it's almost impossible not to hear some kind of warning one way or the other. But at the same time, you're the one who's got to take the action in terms of that. You got to pay attention to it. No matter how often you have to watch The Bachelor or whatever is on TV, pay attention to it, even if it drives you nuts. I promise you this, your normal stuff on TV will replay at some point. But if you see these people on TV who are having to do wall-to-wall coverage, that's their job. They have to do that. Give them a break. They got to do what they got to do to help protect lives and coverage. When the giant Linwood tornado hit a couple of years ago, there were almost all the stations went wall to wall in the coverage, and it, didn't even really, there are plenty of people that missed in terms of that, but there were plenty of people who were upset that they, went on and on the coverage. And there's a reason for that. That area is all part of Kansas City. And if it's part of Kansas City, they have to do what they got to do. Yep. So end of soapbox.
And yeah, we'll cover these definitely kind of again as we go in kind of different ways, but hopefully these make sense to you. And this is really kind of the core of the things that we're going to sort of preach about today. All right, so just a quick rundown of some historic local weather. There was the Ruskin Heights tornado, Kansas City derecho event, the Great Floods. I'm sure probably a lot of you remember those. I certainly remember as a kid, that was kind of one of the big things that sort of captured my attention as a long-term kind of weather thing. There's the North KC early May tornado. Say that was also called like the Mother's Day tornado or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Of course, Joplin, which was a huge deal. They're only kind of within the last few years really fully back on their feet after that. Mm-hmm. The Oak Grove tornado, which both Pete and I were heavily involved with. And then like he's talked about the Linwood major tornado complex. So this is just kind of a smattering of the big ticket items, but we get a lot of weather throughout the year. And I'm not just talking Kansas City again. When I refer to like Kansas City, I mean very regionally here. Contacting the NWS, always good to know. You don't necessarily have to, go through us. If it's more comfortable for you, that's cool. We're happy to do that. We always try to relay stuff. But if we do, these are the channels that we use, and we just want to make sure that everybody's aware. Um, we'll often say NWSKC for short, just to try and save some breath. If you want to look them up on Twitter, you can find them at NWS Kansas City. Facebook, I'm sure you can also find them again as NWS Kansas City. It might take a little bit of digging. Sometimes the Facebook algorithm, when you search, especially for the National Weather Service offices, can be kind of daunting because there's so many offices. And I don't know 100% they still use that, but the last I knew, their spotter line, which is basically where you can call and be like, hey, this is so and so, this is where I'm at, this is what's going on, is that 800 number right there.
Pretty sure that's still active.
Um, the atmosphere under pressure, this is the super basic, like even before we get into radar, just understanding that high pressure means like no storms. Low pressure is generally associated with storms or storm behavior. So when you're watching, whoever on TV and they're like, oh, the high this and the low that, that's really all they're talking about, is this kind of stuff right here. And I'm sure you've seen a map very similar to this a million times. All right. So obviously we have some pretty crazy dynamic weather here in the Midwest. I liked this tweet because it really highlighted, I mean, even just like a couple weeks ago, we went from like snow to warm to snow to warm back and forth within just like a day or two. So this is just sort of highlighting that. Maybe not necessarily other areas in the country, but the things out here, just because we're right in the middle of the country, Arctic air can come down, the warm, moist air from the Gulf, the warm, dry air from the Southwest, the mountain slope kind of accelerates things. We're just in this kind of weird mixing zone where we can get a lot of different things, and sometimes in fairly rapid fashion. So, I think it just speaks to how weather aware you should be, not even just from like day to day, but even like hour to hour on some of those days where it's going to be more active. Here's a good case where regionally it was incredibly active. There were tornadoes down there near Branson and Springfield. Meanwhile, up here, this was for my birthday a few years back, we were getting a veritable ice storm here in Kansas City. You can see the little reticle there on that graphic, that little crosshair. That's where we were, and this is a whole storm complex. So freezing, rain, and ice all the way down here where there's tornado and severe thunderstorm warnings. So relatively speaking, only a couple 100 miles or so, and you've got basically every weather across that spectrum. So, if this were a spring or summer setup, it's very likely that we would have seen, probably some severe thunderstorms up in our neck of the woods instead of an ice storm. So, temperature can play a huge role as to what's going on. This is just an example. This is not like an actual, I didn't like pull a day from history, but just kind of an example of a dynamic weather day. And I'm not going to run through every single line here, but as you're looking at it, early in the morning is generally kind of when like National Weather Service will put out like their outlooks for the day. Hey, this is what we think. This is the general timing. We just show here, sunrise, things start to heat up, the humidity builds in. This is stuff that we'll probably see, probably not like Monday, Tuesday. Temperature wise, we could certainly see something similar to this, but basically as the day goes, there's more humidity, clouds start to build up. Then you start seeing like watches, then you start seeing warnings, tornado blows through the area. And then after that, it's just kind of done. But it's like there's all this buildup, all this lead time to know, hey, I need to be paying attention. And then there's a short window of the actual activity. So that's really what I'm harping on here in this graphic. Understanding thunderstorms, just some quick facts. There's about 1,800 thunderstorms happening any moment on Earth, or an average of 16 million thunderstorms per year. Also, this is one of my favorite things. People always think it's a 1-to-1 ratio when you count the thunder to lightning thing, but in reality, you You estimate how many miles away a storm is by counting the number of seconds between the flash of lightning and the clap of thunder, but then you divide the number of seconds by 5 to get. So, example here, if it's 10 seconds between the lightning and the thunder, it's only 2 miles away. It's not 10 like a lot of people would have you think. So, and that's a pretty good rule of thumb. I would definitely say, generally speaking, we'll talk about this, but if you're hearing thunder, you should probably be indoors anyway. But if you're just curious to know if it's approaching you or going away, say your power is out, you don't have access to your apps and things, counting that distance can tell you, okay, is it approaching me or is it moving away from me? Thunderstorms are typically formed in the spring and summer, but they can definitely happen anytime, day or night, all year round. Thunder and lightning can be observed with a snowstorm, also known as thunder snow, one of Jim Cantori's favorites. If you've ever seen him on the Weather Channel, he gets super excited about it.
Yes, he does.
And then thunderstorms can, as you've seen, can vary widely in size and duration. They might be like a quick little 10-minute like turbulent burst, or it might be a few hours of just thunder and rain and hail and just not nice weather. Some mechanics to understand here. You've probably heard about CAP. It's something, especially as we get into kind of a little bit later spring, closer to summer. This is one of the things that can kind of prevent thunderstorms from happening. But this cap is just this warm layer of air, like it's warmer than the air kind of right around it, and it keeps it's literally like a cap on like a bottle. It keeps those clouds and that moisture from bubbling up, and eventually, if there's enough lift, it can erode that cap away. And you can see in the graphic here, as it gets a little bit weaker, or as the temperature starts to normalize, those clouds can really start to get that height and turn into thunderstorms. So that might be one of those things where if you hear the guys on TV start talking about, blah, 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 thunderstorms are possible today, but there's a cap in place, that'll be, that could be a scenario where it looks really nice out. And then just almost out of the blue, as that cap erodes, all that moisture that's built up can rapidly condensate and turn into clouds and really get storms going quickly. I mean, it can be like a half an hour turnaround from a sunny day to now you're looking at storms moving in over your area. So that is one of those, if you hear them talking about cap, that's I should probably keep an eye on that because things could possibly change really quick. Some of nature's warning signs, which is always good to know as a person or a spotter. I feel like it's one of the best ways to kind of just keep yourself situationally and weather aware, is literally just to know what you're looking at. Any of you that follow us on socials probably saw, I think over the last week, I got some really good cloud pictures of some storms that rolled through here. So yeah, clouds, they can tell you quite a bit. And you're not always going to have your phone or the internet or a TV or the radio. Sometimes you're just out and about, or maybe you're that farm, like Pete said, like 1,000 miles from nowhere, and this is the only way you've got to be able to kind of acclimate to what's going on. So what do you do if you're driving around and you start seeing some ominous looking clouds? Like, are they just scary looking clouds, or are they like legitimate, like this is stuff I need to pay attention to? And that's kind of what we're going to cover here in this next whole section. This is a neat graphic from the Met Office over in the UK. Shows all the different types of clouds, and really most of what we're going to focus on is kind of this low level stuff, with the exception of the cumulonimbus here on the right hand. That sucker can get huge, and that's a very mature thunderstorm. And again, we'll talk more specifically about that, but this is just a quick reference to show you, a fully mature thunderstorm can definitely grow to 40, 50, 60,000 feet up, which is why if you've ever been on a jet and had your flight rerouted and you're like, well, why are we getting rerouted? Probably because they had to go around a storm like this, because they're not going to fly above that or through it. So here is a good example of a nice puffy cloud. And that's just a cumulus because it's short. Cumulonimbus, again, would be if this guy is towering a lot more, but this would be more of an early stage photo. These are in developing thunderstorms, super common. They look like cauliflower or popcorn to me. Sometimes they're good at, like, my kids like to point out like animals or crazy things like that in them.
Okay.
You can sometimes see rapid growth in these kinds of clouds, and that would be one of the signs where if the cloud is very much like expanding or growing upward, you're looking at the possibility of it maturing into a thunderstorm. With this kind of thing, you can usually expect more rain um, as it grows, maybe increased lightning. And again, just basically as it grows in these stages, you'll see more wind, you'll see potentially more hail as it turns into a cumulonimbus cloud. Uh, this is one of my things I will
I love
fight
this
people
one.
about is the spelling of lightning because it drives me nuts. It's a pet peeve. But I just wanted to run through some fact and fiction here because I know some of these are probably pretty obvious, some of them might not be. Fiction, lightning never strikes the same place twice, but fact, lightning absolutely has favorite spots. Um, Sometimes it's a person, but more often than not, it's usually like a building or something like that. It might be like a naturally kind of iron rich rock or something like that. Like, we've got a lot of different rock structures around Kansas City, but lightning has favorite places and will definitely be attracted to those more than just once. Fiction, if it's not raining, there's no danger from lightning. When fact, lightning often strikes outside of heavy rain and may also occur as far away as 10 miles or more from rainfall. Fiction, the rubber soles of shoes or rubber tires on a car will prevent you from being struck by lightning. And they really don't provide as much protection as some people uh, might make it sound. The steel frame of the car, though, will actually kind of act almost as like a shield. It will kind of direct the lightning around you. Though, if you're like me and you often have like a phone or something plugged into it, just know that any electronics that are plugged in might get fried. So,
Yeah.
if you are having to pull off the side of the road and wait things out, take your hand off the wheel, make sure your lights are on, your flashers and things like that. Generally turning off the car and pulling the key out so things don't fuse together is a good option. It's still always better, absolutely, to be inside a vehicle rather than outside the vehicle. So even though it's not 100%, nothing's ever going to be 100%. Being inside a vehicle is a pretty good option for a thunderstorm. If you obviously can't be inside of a solid structure. Fiction, people struck by lightning carry an electrical charge and should not be touched. But the fact is, lightning strike victims carry zero electrical charge and should absolutely be attended to immediately. Obviously, only if it's safe for you. Don't become a statistic. You always have to look out for you first. But yeah, if there's a lightning strike victim and you can safely get to them, they will need medical attention. Fiction, heat lightning occurs after very hot summer days and poses no threat. But really, what is referred to as heat lightning is actually lightning from a thunderstorm that's just too far away for the thunder to be heard. And those could still be moving in your direction. So even though you see it off in the distance and you don't hear it, keep tabs on it. Maybe it is moving your direction. Be situationally aware, be weather aware. Some other lightning facts. Lightning strikes US about 25 million times a year or 100 times per second globally. An average of 27 people are killed per year in the US by lightning. Fortunately, only 10 in 2021. Um, Males are 5 times more likely to be struck. Around 85% of lightning fatalities are men. And people aged 15 to 34 years account for almost half of all lightning strike victims, 41%. The majority, 89% of lightning deaths occur among whites. So for Pete and I, things aren't looking good if we go stand outside in a thunderstorm. Uh, the average lightning bolt has enough energy to power a 100-watt light bulb over 3 months. The air around a lightning strike is around 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, this is why people that are struck need medical attention. Most lightning deaths and injuries happen when people are caught outdoors, more so in the summer. Again, be situationally aware. Don't put yourself in these situations. Improve your odds. Lightning accounts for over a quarter of all wildfires started on average. No place outside is safe from lightning when thunderstorms are in the area. And if you can hear thunder, which I think I mentioned earlier, you are within lightning striking distance, and it is recommended to stay indoors up to 30 minutes after you hear the last sound of thunder. And that is something at the Emergency Operations Center that we prescribe to. We also use distance as a factor, but here in Independence, we will actually shut down the spray parks when lightning gets within a certain range, or if we happen to be out and about and we hear thunder, we issue that command that shuts those parks down so that people, get out of the pool, get out of the water, get indoors.
Yep.
Here's another good tweet. This one from Mike Betts from the Weather Channel. This is where lightning was happening outside of the rain and away from the main storm. This is, oh, it struck from the blue, or bolt from the blue. It can happen. Lightning can travel great distances, and it doesn't have to necessarily be tied directly to a storm. There's a lot more involved with that. So even when you're indoors, you should keep these safety tips in mind. Again, if you can hear thunder or see lightning, don't use corded phones. Probably most folks don't still have them, but that also extends to other corded things here, like computers, electrical equipment, anything that puts you in direct contact with electricity via a cable of any sort. Avoid plumbing, including sinks, baths, and faucets. You know, probably don't want to like have your hands in like the dish soap and be washing dishes if you've got like all metal piping and things like that in the middle of a thunderstorm. Stay away from windows and doors and stay off porches. It just puts you closer to um, areas that are more prone to lightning. You're not as insulated, being kind of right on the edges there. And an odd thing that I found is do not lie on concrete floors and do not lean against concrete walls. And the reason for this is, one, there's rebar in them a lot of times, but also they can hold a lot of moisture, which can actually make them slightly conductive surfaces. So we'll talk about it a little bit down below, but basically like crouching down and staying on your feet is a better option. So yeah, if you're if you're completely unable to get indoors away from lightning, these are some tips that we've put together to still try to maximize your safety. Getting off of elevated areas like hills, buildings, mountain ridges, peaks, things like that. Those will greatly increase your odds of not getting struck by lightning. Again, don't lie flat on the ground. Crouch down as low as you can, but remain on your feet. Never shelter under an isolated tree. Sometimes, you're out in the woods and there's nothing but trees, but just try to not, any isolated trees are more likely to be hit. Never use a cliff or a rocky overhang for shelter. Those can, with rain, with wind, can get loose and cause a mudslide, and that would be really bad to be caught in that kind of a situation. Immediately get out of and away from ponds, lakes, pools, other bodies of water, and then stay away from objects that conduct electricity. Pretty straightforward stuff. Here's a neat graphic showing a lot of different types of lightning. I know recently there's been some pretty major storms down south, and they have created a lot of what's called the sprite lightning and tendrils, and it was really cool to see some of those pictures. If you get a chance, just go Google sprite lightning, and you'd be pretty shocked. A lot of times this happens like away from clouds, and it's very high up in the atmosphere, and it almost looks like kind of looks like red jellyfish in a way. Kind of jagged looking, but it's really neat. And it's extremely like I said, high altitude lightning. I saw a chat here. I didn't want to miss anything.
Oh no, we're good.
Okay,
We're good here.
cool.
No worries. A quick note on the high altitude lightning. On YouTube, there's a guy named Pecos Hank who is not only a great chaser, but him and another guy whose name I can't think of, Paul Smith, possibly. They have a big deal in terms of all of the lightning that they've been finding in the upper atmosphere, including the fact that I think they discovered something as well too. I think they call it ghosts.
Yeah,
But
that is a newer form. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's really fascinating if you're interested in seeing this kind of stuff. It's not very often I've seen much of that out here simply because of the the amount of light in terms that comes off of Kansas City. But going to the east from here for sure, from Oak Grove, considering how far out we are, but watching it from east, occasionally you can see something like this. It doesn't happen all the time, and it's a little more difficult to see with the naked eye, but specialized night vision stuff, you could almost see it almost all the time going to the east from here. It's pretty neat.
Yep. So a lot of what we're going to cover is this stuff that's really just the cloud, more of the cloud-based stuff. But I just wanted people to be aware there are definitely certainly other types of lightning that don't necessarily equate to storms.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, straight line winds. We're just plowing through all the different kind of hazards to be aware of here. And straight line winds are exactly that. It's winds that blow in a single direction. Typically, straight line winds can leave a damage path wider than a tornado, but not normally as extreme. So again, much larger damage area, but usually not quite as damaging as taking like a tornadic impact.
Mhm.
Though wind speeds associated with straight line winds are almost under 100 miles per hour, there are cases where they can be higher. And this picture on the right is a picture that we received when we did damage assessment here in Independence after a nasty windstorm in June of 2015. So this was very local, and that is you can see the person kind of standing in the doorway of that house compared to the size of that tree. It was nasty, nasty wind we got. That was upwards of close to, I think, 100 miles per hour. I want to say the highest reading I got on my anemometer was about 95 miles per hour. But also keep in mind that as you go up in elevation, even just like elevation as high as like a tree, the wind can be higher, 30, 40 feet up than it is on the ground.
Mhm. I think it was last year we had a storm roll through here where the radar was picking up wind speeds up to 115 miles per hour, but that doesn't necessarily translate down all the way to ground level here. Down here was about 70, but
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, when we get into the radar section a little bit later, we'll talk about kind of why that is and why
mhm,
you've got to be kind of aware of what you're looking at on radar because yeah, we'll touch on that later.
mhm.
This is just another funny graphic for windy days. I've seen like our local TV stations sometimes do this and a lot of other stations, but they will rate a windy day kind of like you rate a hurricane or a tornado. I
Sure.
like when they do stuff like that. Here's me holding some hail. Obviously, hail is a big deal. We don't necessarily get a ton of it like this, but um, hail and straight line winds, you know, they're not necessarily as impressive or get as much attention as tornadoes, but I feel like, especially combined, they can be just as deadly. Hail can absolutely exceed the size of softballs and fall at speeds of over 100 miles per hour, seriously injuring or killing somebody in its path. I mean, if you look at that, the largest stones there, that'd be like throwing basically like a baseball. And me just like throwing a fastball, that hitting you in the head would be, I would not want to be out in that. So obviously try to be inside for hail. The largest recorded hailstone in US history fell on July 23rd. It measured 8 inches in diameter, which is roughly like football sized. 6.2 million properties in the US experienced one or more damaging hail events in 2020. 2020 claims, like insurance claims, resulted in almost $14.2 billion in losses. And that's just from hail when I looked that up. Um, the top 5 states to receive major hail events in 2021 were Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Oklahoma. And these were pretty closely followed by Colorado, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota. Texas, by far and large, is almost always at the number one spot every year. And they have almost, I think, like almost 50% more than other states. One, they're geographically a lot larger, but two, they're in a really good spot for those kinds of conditions. So the other 9 following Texas were pretty close together as far as numbers went. For those that might not know, this is the very basics of how hail is formed. With thunderstorms, you have kind of an updraft. And with that, it raises the moisture up. And with these really tall thunderstorms, like we talked about with cumulonimbus clouds, oftentimes they will get so high up there above the freezing line. And so if the wind can keep those water particles aloft long enough, they'll freeze and then they'll stick together, eventually forming hail balls. And then they literally become so heavy that that updraft can't keep them aloft and they fall down. In a nutshell, that's hail, which is scary to think about, that there could be winds big enough to hold, like in that picture there on the upper right, hail that big was basically being held aloft, floating from air moving upward. So think about that in terms of like when a tornado comes through, like why you're seeing all that debris being lifted into the atmosphere and being thrown around. Those are crazy winds. And then if you have been caught in a hailstorm, hopefully you didn't end up with a windshield like this person down here. But I have lost one windshield out storm chasing, but it was not due to hail. It was some guy in front of me that spun his tires and kicked rocks up. But my point is that you definitely don't want to get caught out in a hailstorm, especially if it's a really nasty hailstorm, because it can smash through windshields, it can total your car, it can very, very much injure or kill you if it hits you directly. When driving in hail, we will actually kind of cover that if you don't mind waiting a little bit. We actually talk specifically about like what to do when you get caught in a car. So remind me when we get there. But yeah, we'll absolutely cover that. It's an excellent question. Um, Got to click back in. Okay, so yeah, definitely never go outside during a hailstorm. Try to protect your property ahead of time. I know there's not really a lot that a lot of us can do, um, but things I've seen like with cars, people will put like folded cardboard boxes like on their windows and then kind of strap it down with like bungees or put tarps over it to kind of help keep it in place. Those types of things can at least, even if it like wrecks your car's exterior with dents and things, that type of prevention could at least keep your windshields intact or your windows. So if you're on the road, this would be, per your question, about the only time where I would say seeking shelter under an overpass would be permissible. However, that assumes there's no high winds at ground level associated with the storm. So this is sort of a serious talk moment for all of us. As we talk about some of these preparedness actions, it's kind of one of those things where I always describe it as what is the greatest threat in that moment. And when I say in the moment, I very much mean that it can be like almost a second by second thing. You have to be constantly assessing what's my highest threat right now. Is it hail? Is it water? Is it wind? Is it a tornado? Is it debris? Whatever the greatest threat is, take that preparedness action. And again, that might change by the time you like get up and get under an overpass. Maybe now the hail is a little bit less of a threat, but now you're like, oh, but this tornado is coming up or this high wind is getting pretty crazy. Maybe you don't want to be under the overpass. There's not a right or wrong answer. All we can do is try to give you guys the tools to make the best decision that makes sense to you at the moment. And I know I kind of am just glossing over that, but when things get down to that serious situation, if you're at least in the mindset of what's my greatest threat, I would say the best option is to react to that threat in the moment. I hope that makes a lot of sense. Um, what do you do after a hailstorm? Assess the damage. If you check your trees, shrubs, plants around the house, see if they're stripped of their foliage, because if they are, there is a possibility that your roof is damaged. And that's just kind of a rule of thumb. If there's just like a little bit of like foliage, like leaves and stuff that kind of got a little shredded by the hail, probably not a big deal. But if you're looking at like a lot of vegetation damage, that was probably either a lot of hail or large hail, and you might want to have somebody come out and check your roof. Always do at least a visual. Oh, Pete came back. It's always good to have at least a visual inspection, but if you're not comfortable with it, or if you do think you've got damage up there, I would certainly not get up on the roof yourself. I would try to definitely have somebody like an insurance agent or somebody come out to do that. Give me 1 second here. I need to make Pete a co-host again. Yes. All right. Welcome back, Pete.
Thank you. Sorry. Suddenly my computer decided right now was the time to restart.
It happens. Yeah. And if
Yeah.
any of that happens to you guys as we go, you should be able to just get back into class. It might take us just a second to get you admitted, but if for whatever reason you got to drop and then come back, absolutely feel free to do so. Yeah, also, like I said, check for roof damage. If like patio covers, screens, or soft aluminum roofs are dented, check for that. Check your car for dents. Absolutely check for broken glass, or cracked glass. Try to protect your property from further damage. Cover any broken windows in your home or vehicle, especially if this is going to be, if this is a big enough storm, it's probably going to be at least a few days or more before you can get anybody out to fully repair it. So try to do the temporary repair, protect the other things as best you can, cover the holes, just temporary patches and things like that. And also make sure you're filing those insurance claims and or selecting a repair company. Everybody does, everybody's got a different insurance. There's different policies, procedures, but always try to get your insurance involved earlier rather than later. The bigger the damage zone, whatever kind of threat it was, the later you put in that report, it's only going to push back the service that you get. And in the middle of like spring and summer, that could mean you're going through multiple other storms along the way without getting those repairs done, and getting those payouts or whatever. So just as a word of advice, I'm not here to say, one insurance company over another. I'm not doing that, but definitely try to get your insurance involved. And then if you do have to get another roof, try to see if you can get or use hail resistive roofing materials. It's always a good option, especially if you can kind of convince your agent, like, hey, this is a good preventative. Like, I'm not really asking for a lot here. I'm trying to future proof this, sell it however you got to do it. Try to make them pay for it. All right, here is a good graphic. You can definitely find this on Google. It's called the hail size comparison chart. So if you Google like NOAA up here in the top right, NOAA hail size comparison chart, this is probably the graphic you'll find. You can print it out on a standard piece of paper, and it should be exactly the size here. You can laminate it, or you can just kind of keep these things in mind, but it's a good way to approximate if you're going to be reporting hail. Definitely don't say marbles. Marbles can be all kinds of crazy sizes. So try to equate it to like coins and sports balls. The best way to go. Kind of moving the screen around here. There we go. All right. Flooding. AMS definition of a flash flood is a flood that rises and falls quite rapidly with little or no advanced warning, usually as the result of intense rainfall over a relatively small area. Pretty straightforward. Flash flood, it happens fast. There's not really a good way to know when this is going to happen, though over prolonged periods of a lot of rain, or even if it's like every other day, those chances go up. Floods are the number one natural disaster in the US based on dollars of damage. Floodwaters can roll boulders, tear out trees, destroy buildings and bridges. And in the past 5 years, all 50 states have experienced flooding or flash floods of some sort. Homeowners insurance doesn't cover flood damage. There's additional coverage for that. And I want to say starting in April, there's also new laws that go into effect about that. I don't know much about it. It's just something I kind of saw through Twitter. But if you're in a flood prone area, again, this is a conversation to have with your insurance, because you might not have this kind of insurance. It's an additive on top of standard home insurance. A car can easily be carried away in just 2 feet of rushing water, sometimes less. Just a few inches of rushing water is enough to knock somebody on their feet and sweep them away. So, turn around, don't drown. Um, Never drive over a flooded road. Just don't. Besides the preparedness actions you can take for all hazards, flooding definitely kind of has its own unique challenges in getting prepared. Again, if you're in a flood prone area, there are notifications you can sign up through like the Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service. Really, if you've got any questions about that, or if you're like really, really in a flooded area or a flood prone area, call your local National Weather Service office. They can point you in the right direction. Just Google your local office, give them a call, say, hey, I'm in a flood area. Like what things can I sign up for to get notifications about that kind of stuff? And they'll get you hooked up.
Uh, I'm going to add one other piece to that. I believe through FEMA's website, you can run a flood determination on your own address and see what kind of flood zone you're in as well too.
Yep. And even some realty companies have really started to kind of focus on those sorts of things too. So again, this is one of those things where there's a ton of resources out there, but hopefully us talking about this stuff just like brings your awareness level up. You're like, oh, didn't know I could even, get information like that. Yeah, it's out there. Absolutely. If you have trouble finding it, holler at us on socials. I can't say personally I'd 100% be able to find it, but damned if I won't try to contact my people and figure something out for you. When prepping your home, make sure you have access to sandbag materials, assuming you've got time to do so. Have plumbers install check valves to prevent floodwaters from backing up into drains in your home, especially with new construction. I think this already happens, but hey, if you're building a new house, might want to check with your plumber and be like, hey, are we doing this? Test your sump pump, make sure it works. Mine has not worked sometimes in the past because I failed to check it. So this is a personal ad for me. Be sure to know where your circuit breakers are. I'm in my basement and my circuit breaker is right over here on the wall. So if I had, what is this? If I ended up with like 4 feet of water in my basement, I would not be able to come down to my basement because it would basically be up to the bottom of my circuit breaker down here. You definitely do not want to go into possibly electrified water. Also going into flood water in general, bad anyway. There's all kinds of, think about it. If it's coming up from up through the sewers, there's nastiness in it, disease. Like, I'm not going to get into all of it, but just know that getting into flood water is always a health hazard at minimum.
Yep.
And again, I know I've talked about it. I'm going to beat it one more time. Make sure you're covered by flood insurance, especially if you're in an area that you're much more at risk for that. It can take 30 or more days from sign up to have that coverage go into effect, which a lot of people don't know. And that can be a huge deal. So if that rings true to you and you're in one of those areas, I highly recommend, especially being early spring now, look into it. You might consider it. Again, when flooded, turn around, don't drown. You're probably going to see us on social say this crap all the time because we mean it. Don't do it. I don't know. I don't think I got the graphic added to this presentation, but I know I shared it at least on Twitter where a car, like a full car, had tried to drive over what they thought was just a little, a couple inches of water on the road. But what had happened is it washed it completely out, and her whole car was basically between two segments of road. So if this is the segments, this is the road, this is the gully that washed out, and her car was at the bottom of it, which means it was fully underwater at one point. Yeah, with muddy water, it's really hard to tell if the street's even still there. So if I just don't do it. Okay. Don't be one of those people that we see floating around Westport when it floods, or there's a couple places in Independence, like especially under some overpasses and things like that, where the drainage is bad. And then you just see the cars just floating around with their blinkers on, people sitting on top waiting to be rescued. Just don't do it, man.
As my wife calls it, don't be the flood representative.
Yes. So, all right, we've run through all of there's some nature's warning signs, and then also kind of just like the general, the basic hazards of things. At this point, do you have any questions? Did I skip something? Did I miss anything that you might have had a question on? Let us know. Take a quick break. If everybody's good, we can go ahead and keep running. I'll give it a minute or two here just before we keep rolling. Chat.
We'll definitely get to that, John. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We definitely will cover some of that here in a bit. All right. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, if anybody's got any good links or stuff that they already use, absolutely. You guys can always let us know. We'd love to share resources and stuff with folks.
Yeah. It is pretty neat to see what some of the stuff the National Weather Service and Storm Prediction Center have out there that's available for people to use. Sometimes you have to dig for it, but some of it's very, very impressive, very, very neat, very unique. There's especially lately, there's a lot of other websites that you can go to that freely give the information in terms of upper air maps, or they give sounding information, which gives you kind of the upper air information, and then a lot of future information in terms of like the GFS or the European model data and stuff like that. Some of it you have to pay for, some of it's free. It just kind of depends on the website, but there is, if you look for it, there's a wealth of information, and we will talk about that later on.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And if you guys, maybe a couple days from now or something, like after this all sinks in, if you've got more questions, you can always hit us up on socials. Just message us on Facebook Messenger or even Instagram. We've got those accounts tied together, so we get the messages from both places. I'm usually on Twitter a lot, so holler at me there. But yeah, you can always ask us questions. We don't mind answering. It doesn't matter, if you are up at 3 o'clock in the morning and have a question. I'm not saying I'll get back with you immediately. Pete's usually a little bit earlier to rise than I am, but I always try to check messages first thing in the morning and try to get back as soon as I can. So
if we don't know the answer, A+ to you for finding one, but we'll find somebody who does know the answer.
yeah, one way or the other, we'll get an answer. We between our networks of like emergency management, National Weather Service, and other folks, usually we can at least find somebody to point us and whoever in the right direction. All right, let's roll on here. This we're going to get into kind of what constitutes severity. This is also a bit more spotter centric. It's more of just like an understanding as to why this stuff exists and kind of why it matters. So again, everything we've talked about to this point can both be applied to just regular thunderstorms as well as severe thunderstorms. So while non-severe thunderstorms can be damaging to some degree, why is it important that we define what severe is? And why not just talk about all thunderstorms the same way? Like, we call them thunderstorms. So, but the reason for this exact definition is that severe weather is more dangerous, and it was felt that lines had to be drawn at certain thresholds. As things get from, yeah, they could be damaging and they could be, they might pose a bit of a threat, but at this point, where we're drawing these lines is where it becomes like life threatening, or it at least dramatically increases the chance of becoming life threatening. So even within severe weather, it's also important to take note of specifics. So there's tornado and hurricane classification. So obviously a tornado is a severe thing, but even within tornadoes, there's categories. Same thing with hurricanes. So at like an EF3 or a category 3, those types of severe weather become major tornadoes and hurricanes respectively. So if somebody says a major tornado, know that is at least an EF3 or greater on the scale, similar to a hurricane. A major hurricane is a Cat 3, 4, or 5. So as the threats become more and more life-threatening, the verbiage around those particular severe weather modes also change. And to know what severe is, as far as thunderstorms go, it's very simple. Wind speeds of 58 miles per hour or greater, or hail of 1 inch in diameter or greater, or a funnel cloud or tornado spotted or radar indicated. And any one of these things can constitute a severe warning, but you might also have multiple of these things going on. And that's kind of what I just mentioned. As these threats kind of ramp up and or stack, the verbiage around those will also be changing. So the talking heads on TV, like they'll start getting into those specifics. National Weather Service updates or Storm Prediction Center updates, that the verbiage will reflect all of the different threats included. Classifying severe weather, above is the old outlooks, which only had 4 risk zones, whereas the new system has 6 risk zones to better depict a threat analysis. I say new, it's been like 10 years, but a lot of people were not aware of it. I like history, Pete likes history, so we're
Yep.
showing you the old and the new. So really focus on the bottom graphic there, and you've got, so there's the light green, then there's the darker green, yellow, orange, red, and magenta or pink, whatever you want to call it. But there's the reason for this was that they were finding that they were kind of a little more hit and miss. So with, even though there's more to know, it does a much better job of depicting very accurately kind of that scale in threat. So here is that kind of broken down for you. You've got at that light green, it's usually non-severe. And then there's a breakover into the darker green, which is kind of the very bottom end, the low rung, possibly severe stuff. And again, as you go from marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, and high risk. And as you can see there, again, it's kind of a ramping, you're talking like just sort of like rain and then like a lot of rain. Okay, well now I've got like rain and wind, and now I've got rain, wind, and hail, and now I've got rain, wind, hail, and tornadoes. Like it really kind of ramps up there.
Yep. Fun fact, the last time Kansas City was in a high risk was March 12th, 2006.
It is not often that we see a high, and that's not to say that we don't have damaging weather. It's just, the chances for it, for hitting that threshold, are typically a little bit lower for us.
Yeah. Typical, I think every year, I think there's no more than 5 high risk days overall in the entire United States.
Yeah. Usually I tell my guys at the EOC, and specifically my spotters, I mean, obviously always pay attention to like the yellow, that's the slight risk. But once you get into the orange and above, the enhanced, and the moderate and high, like those are really the, like, we've got to be on our A game. Like we should be checking our phones constantly, keeping each other up to date, be on the lookout. You're probably going to get activated, that sort of thing. And I feel like that applies to individuals as well. That's not to take away from the yellow and even kind of the darker green outlook kind of days. But if you see it's one of those brighter colors, that should be an indication right off the bat. You should be on your game and keep your head on a swivel those days.
Yep.
Now, not to get too confused with colors, but that's why I wanted to show the differences down here. This is an outlook, but the coloring here is based on zones for timing. And I wish they would do things like this a little bit differently. And I think they have kind of switched away from the threat colors for these for timing. They use like a scale of like blues and purples now or something, but just make sure that you are understanding the information that's being presented. So an outlook, again, that's the general overview. That's their thoughts. It's usually involving like, here's our general thoughts on what it's going to be, but it's more focusing on the timing of what they think is going to happen. And that's reflected right here in that outlook graphic, versus a watch, which is the, things are looking pretty ripe. There's definitely a chance that things could pop off. Now's your time to, if you have not already, like go ahead and start taking your at least preliminary precautionary actions, preparedness actions. And then the warning is the very nitty gritty information of, this is what's going on. This is what time we issued this warning. This is the area impacted. And this is the absolutely, like, whatever your preparedness action is, now's the time to do it. Knowing the difference between county-based warnings and polygon warnings is always good. A lot of I will say more traditional or older notifications still use the whole county versus the newer polygon. And all that is telling you here is that, if you're looking at a storm and you get a whole county warning, there's a much larger kind of false alarm rate. Whereas the polygon is usually a lot more like precise in this is like really the area we expect this to go, and only the things usually right within the polygon and just kind of the fringes directly around it are the people getting notified of that. So in this case, they're pretty similar in size, but if I was on the north end of this, I probably wouldn't necessarily want to get notified for it because it's going to just go off to my southeast here. So just good to remember, county versus polygon. Polygons are always a higher accuracy as far as like limiting the false alarms.
I believe to some extent, most, like the warnings are always issued as polygons, but sometimes the siren systems that people use are still based on county warnings, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
it's just slow technology updates.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a litany of reasons, and that's a whole, it's a minor soapbox I get on here in a little bit. But here is a really good example of a tornado warning that you would see from like NWS put out or the SPC put out. And it shows you this warning is valid until 6:15 p.m. It was issued on this date. What's the threats? Tornado and hail. Where's it going to be? Okay, it shows you right here. This is the area we're expecting to get this up through 6:15 p.m. Now these things update and these things expire. So it's important to make sure that you're keeping track of those. Don't just get focused on the one warning or the one watch. Be watching for additional things. Sometimes they will counter their own warning with an updated one. Maybe they condense the graphic or maybe they expand the area. So make sure you're always looking for whatever the updated one is. Mm-hmm. Some more understanding of thunderstorms. There's 4 ingredients really. There's shear, which is kind of the local variation of the wind direction in any of its components. There's the lift that we talked about, especially like with hail. That's when temperature fronts, so like warm, cold, dry, moist air move through the atmosphere. The wind can blow up or down rolling hills and mountains. Or when winds blow in from like the ocean or a lake, those kinds of things can create lift. Instability is what can lead to up and down drafts. It's also, you might hear a storm listed as a convective storm, meaning that it's got instability to it. It's not just what they call like the garden variety of storm, or something called horizontal forcing, which is like the side to side kind of winds. In a nutshell, instability is the air down here and the air aloft. It's too different. It's too dynamic. And the up and down drafts are just trying to like equalize everything and make it nice and neat. And then of course, moisture, which is the prime component for creating clouds and rain. And if you've got all of these 4 in the right amount, you can get thunderstorms, tornadoes, and other severe weather. Thunderstorms you might also hear on TV or otherwise. They might call them isolated or single cell. You might hear them referred to as clusters or form into lines. There's a few different ways of saying this, and the different people say different things, but just know that, so there's like individuals, there's like clusters, and then there's lines. That's all you really need to know. I know we've talked about it. Thunderstorms can produce heavy rain for a brief period of time, ranging from like 30 minutes to an hour or longer, but only about 10% of all thunderstorms are classified as severe. And again, this is why we don't want to talk about all thunderstorms the same, and why it's important to make those differentiations. So if only 10% are severe, well, it's like, okay, well, thunderstorms are thunderstorms, but this is the 10% we really want you to focus on. And again, that's 1 inch hail or bigger, 58-mile-an-hour winds or greater, and then either a tornado or a funnel cloud has been spotted or at least detected. Dew point is something that people will talk about. This is another fun little graphic, but it kind of relates to the humidity in the air. and also really ties into cloud formation. And I have found in our area, at least, other areas around the country may be different, but for our area, I tell my spotters to keep an eye on when they start talking about like the dew point getting to like 65, 68 is kind of that cutover point though, where that's usually where you've got kind of those dynamics in place. There's the right dew point, there's like the moisture, the lift, the instability, the heating. All those ingredients are starting to kind of pan out. And of course, if you're outside, a higher dew point means your hair gets frizzy. Mine gets nuts. I'm sure some of you have dealt with that before.
Yeah, I wish I had that problem.
Here's a little bit more about, we talked about wind and shear. And I know a lot earlier in the presentation, I talked about how the wind is at greater speeds as you go up in the atmosphere. So this is just talking, this is a good graphic for that. You can see the thunderstorm. You can see that updraft, it's tilted, but the reason it's tilted is because at the different layers of the atmosphere, the wind is going not only at different speeds, but it's also going in different directions. So you've got the general movement that tilts it, but then you've also got these higher speeds that kind of can spread it out. And that also creates vorticity here because they're at different directions and different speeds. So you get that spinning effect. I hope that makes sense. I know this is not the greatest graphic for that, but I've got another graphic a little bit later on where I will show that tilted updraft with a solid thunderstorm. Oh, it's this one. I forgot it was the next in line. So this, it's almost exactly, let me pan back to the other graphic here. Oh, this graphic. So again, it's almost going the same direction here. The storm is moving kind of visually left to right in this graphic. Same with this in this graphic. The storm is moving from left to right. In this case, I literally walked out into my street and I saw this and I went, holy crap. I didn't know that it was this, like I saw it on radar, which is why I was like, well, it looks like it could be a thing. And I stepped outside. I was like, oh my God. Like to me, I was like tilted up draft. Okay, I see this. Like you can see the spinning, that kind of corkscrew appearance. We'll talk about that here, but this is a mesocyclone rotating storm. So this part of this storm is rotating. I hope that visually you can really see that here. But at first I thought this rain shaft down towards the bottom might actually be a rain wrap tornado because of what I was seeing on radar. And because I couldn't see through the rain, I got on my radio and I was like, hey, if you guys are, in the path of this thing coming north, bail west or bail east, because I don't want you guys in the way. I can't tell, but from my angle, this looks nasty. I sent them this picture and they're like, yeah, we're moving right now. Thank you for letting us know. And it ended up right there not being a tornado, but once it crossed the river, it put down a small, I think it was like an EF0, EF1, as it kind of went across the river and eventually crapped out about 20 miles upstream. But this is one of those things, again, I know I talked about, cumulonimbus clouds, it's cute, this, that, and the other thing. This is why knowing nature's warning signs is really important. Like if you see something like this tells you a lot. Let me move my stuff around. There we go. Okay, so this is a mesocyclone, which really just means that cyclone, it's spinning. The storm is spinning, meso being kind of like a wider area. So mesocyclone is a vortex of air within a convective storm. And again, we said convective means that it has that up and down draft. So the cyclonic nature of these storm features is associated with localized low pressure. Again, we talked about that, low pressure storms. Essentially the heart of the storm itself. Such thunderstorms can feature strong surface winds and severe hail. Even though I was not directly in the path of this, I was kind of on the outside. I think the wind where I was blowing at about 35 miles an hour, which obviously is not severe right where I was, but over underneath this storm, it was blowing really bad. Mesocyclones are often coupled with updrafts and supercells within which tornadoes may form. So I knew these things and I saw this, and that's why I immediately had this, oh crap, reaction. I need to let my spotters know to not be in the way of this thing. That's why we're doing the class. This is the type of stuff I hope that you guys, especially over time, and as you see these things and see videos, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm putting this stuff together. Like this makes a lot of sense. And if not, let me know, because Pete and I'll definitely bring you up to speed. So out of curiosity, anybody that wants to hammer in chat real fast or unmute, tell me what this is. I'm going to pause here for a second. Don't you dare answer, Pete.
Cloud is not the correct answer. Or weather.
Anybody want to take a guess? Well, not seeing anybody. I will tell you, this is actually what?
That's a good one. An SLC.
There you go.
Very
Yeah.
good.
You would think that, John, but Karen is right. That's an SLC, which we colloquially refer to as a scary looking cloud. And the reasons for that we'll cover here. These are also known as scud clouds, which is scattered cumulus under deck, which, you know, it's got that scattered look. It's part of a cumulus cloud structure, and it's under the deck of the cloud. The reason for this is scud clouds are actually not a threat. They are just a feature of many thunderstorms, often hanging down from the underside of a cumulonimbus cloud or the cloud deck. And they're really just formed where warmer and moist air gets caught in a little updraft. Sometimes it might be like, especially if it's rained a lot before the storm and it like has been heating through the day. You can also see this in like even small bodies of water, like little ponds, creeks, rivers. You will get these little kind of wispy updrafts, and all it is just because it's so moist and that dew point so high, that moisture condensates as it's getting lifted up into the cloud deck. But the key feature here is that scattered or ragged looking appearance, and that's how you'll know that it's just an SLC or a scud cloud versus a tornado or a funnel cloud, which has a much smoother appearance because of that rotating effect to it. The scud clouds or SLCs, they might move a bit with the storm, but it's just as that moisture is getting pulled up, and there's no rotation. If you look at it, it really does not change a lot. You might see it kind of move up a little because it's getting wicked from the ground or the water, but there's no like rotation to it. So that's the big difference right there. All right. So this is not a real image. This is just a computer generated image. You'll almost never see a storm this like book example perfect, but this kind of shows some different features. So at a great distance here, you've got the rain and hail here. You've got this wall cloud, which we'll cover in a sec. The tornado, the cumulonimbus cloud itself, the anvil where it kind of tops out and catches those big winds up top. And then the overshooting top is something that you don't often get a chance to see because you have to have a very clear shot at a pretty good distance. But that is where the updraft kind of caps out. If you think of like the old school coffee makers with the little percolator on top, and the coffee kind of, you know, as it heats, it comes up through that tube and sort of splashes in that little plastic window. Same thing here. That moisture is hitting kind of the top of that updraft and spilling out into the rest of the cloud there. So if you see something like that, if you see a storm percolating like a coffee pot, that's a pretty powerful storm right there. Mm-hmm. Here is an actual image of an anvil cloud. Again, down at the bottom, you've got that real kind of the soft kind of broccoli, cauliflower, cottony looking bit. And then you've got that anvil at the top. Now I will say you can also see a little bit of what might be a wall cloud, this little lowering right here. And then there's a little bit of scatteredness right here. There's probably not a tornado, but it looks like there's probably a pretty good rain shaft underneath. One thing to note about anvil clouds is they kind of point in the and I mean this very generally, the direction that the whole storm is heading. There's a lot of dynamics at play, but usually if you can kind of tell where that thing is pointing, that's sort of the trajectory of that whole storm. It's a cool thing to note. Oop, went the wrong direction there. Anvil clouds are named for that flat top of a thunderstorm. They're just massive cumulonimbus clouds that can cover hundreds of miles out from the main thunderstorm. Lightning can strike from these, of course, even parts that are far away from the main complex. Again, we talked about this, those out of the blue lightning bolts. And if you see an anvil cloud, again, know you're looking at a very major thunderstorm. And I already covered this because I always forget what I put in the presentation. But if you can see kind of where it's pointing, that is what way it's going. And these are probably almost going to always be associated with some sort of severe thunderstorm or tornado watch or warning. I would be shocked if a storm gets that big and doesn't at least have a watch associated with it. All right, shelf cloud. So now where, this could be, there's an anvil cloud. This is from the ground level. As it's much, much closer to you, probably what you would see. And this is kind of well, I mean, you can see right here, there's that kind of shelving appearance. There's that thick part, and then it kind of levels out, and then it kind of comes back up. Now, sometimes you might get multiple layers of that, and that's called plating. But usually you'll just see kind of the one main shelf. And again, that direction of that shape is the direction that this thing's heading. These usually are moving pretty quick. If you find yourself staring down the barrel of something like this, know that you're probably you're gonna start seeing wind. Not seeing wind, but you're gonna start getting a lot of wind. Temperature's probably gonna drop, and you're gonna probably get rain and hail like as soon as it starts going overhead, which this is a different location, but the same feature. This is as it rolls over the top, that underside. If you ever watch like Discovery Channel or something, and they show like as a wave like hits the camera and you see the underside of a wave, that's basically what this looks like, the underside of a wave. It's clouds in the air act just like water. But yeah, at this point, like this is where those temperatures start to drop, like the wind really starts to pick up, and you can see kind of to the right of that do not enter sign, that's the rain. And at the speed at which this thing was coming over the top of me, I knew I had about 30 seconds to get back in my truck. So shelf clouds are often found at the leading edge of like a gust front or an outflow boundary from a thunderstorm, or strong winds flowing down and outward from us. So again, this would be like, there's downdrafts, there's updrafts. This is kind of the winds are sort of being forced out ahead of the storm. The outer parts of a shelf cloud are usually smoother with pretty visible rising motion and often tiers or shelves in this case. Underneath the shelf, the appearance is usually a lot different, like I just showed you, usually very turbulent, unsettled. And because of the strong winds associated with the formation of these, expect strong or damaging winds as the leading edge rolls over. And then, if possible, try to seek shelter indoors or in your vehicle at the very least. After that leading edge, besides winds, again, you might get any of the things associated with a severe thunderstorm coming right behind that edge. Burst events are a little bit different. We've had a few of these in the past 5 to 7 years or so.
Yeah.
AMS defines them, and that's the American Meteorological Society, defines a downburst as an area of strong, often damaging winds produced by one or more convective downdrafts. And then there's microburst, macroburst. It's just kind of the size and scale. Safety precautions for downbursts, might not come with a whole lot of warning, especially as the collapse of a large thunderstorm can be kind of unpredictable. And again, that's why there's often no warning. Ideally, you'd already be inside taking shelter from the storm, but if you are caught outdoors, take cover indoors if at all possible. But if it's not possible, try to find solid cover. This would be one of the scenarios where, again, if this is your greatest threat, this is where laying flat on the ground would probably serve you best, because we're talking about a wind threat here. This is a do not take shelter under an overpass kind of event. Overpasses can funnel winds and actually increase wind speed due to the forcing of air through a narrower space. So yeah, that bottom tip there applies not only to straight line winds, but tornadoes, because it's that wind threat being the higher procedure there. Let me see. I finally got this GIF to work, but this is, you can see a series of storms here collapse, and they kind of, you can see the burst happen here. Let me see if I can play it. There you go. So you can see them almost kind of like drips of water, and they sort of expand outward. I'll play that again. Yeah, boom, boom, boom. There were 3 of them. So this was July 22nd. I think it was, I don't think it was last year. I think it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
This is at 10 o'clock at night. So this is one of those where there's no sunlight out. You can't really see it. So if you're not already inside taking shelter from the thunderstorm, you could be driving around, and then all of a sudden this burst event happens. You have no idea, but then all of a sudden you're just getting rocked with insane winds. So this mode that we're in is called velocity mode, and we'll talk more about that in the radar section. But I did some looking around, and there were some areas of this where the gusts exceeded 70 miles per hour right in the downtown Kansas City metro area. There was pretty widespread damage that impacted a lot of communities along and south of the Missouri River. And then over 100,000 were without power immediately following this weather event. So people were like, oh, whatever, it's a thunderstorm, not a big deal. There weren't even necessarily any like warnings or anything out, but all of a sudden they collapsed and created these burst events. So here we've got, anybody want to take a guess? We've got a wall cloud. Again, that lowering we talked about a little bit earlier. Now we're going to kind of get into the nitty gritty here. Also, you can see that spiraling, that kind of corkscrew look to it. You can visually see this thing turning. But a wall cloud is a lowering of the cloud deck of a thunderstorm. Wall clouds often form when the rapidly rising air causes a lowering of pressure below the thunderstorm's main updraft. It's a very, very important feature to keep an eye on. As a person, as a spotter, just if you see something like this, know that like you're getting down to the wire, like this thing might produce a tornado pretty quick. And wall clouds can range from a fraction of a mile up to nearly 5 miles in diameter, according to NWS. So if you notice a wall cloud, you should probably try to observe, like what direction it's going, how fast it's going, so that you don't end up like underneath in the path of that thing. Especially because, like I said, it could form a funnel or a funnel cloud or a tornado. Wall clouds will often have some sort of rotation. Go back again. You should be able to see visually that kind of corkscrewing. That's because the winds are doing this. And that rotation, again, can be an indication that a tornado will touch down, but there's no way to tell for sure. So it's best just to keep an eye out. Definitely, if you're the type of person to report stuff, that would be something where you would definitely want to call that into NWS. Like, here's where I'm at. Here's how far away roughly this thing is. Here's the direction it's going. Here's how fast I think it's going, and let them know. They can usually, if you give them at least your location and be like, I'm looking north or I'm looking east, and it's like a mile or two from me, they can probably put that together on radar pretty fast. And that would be something where if they were unaware of that, because they can't see that lower level of the atmosphere, they might then put out a tornado watch or even a tornado warning in that case where there may have not been one before. Here we've got a funnel cloud, just a little wispy guy. Not to say it's not dangerous, because this thing could ramp up real fast. But a funnel cloud is exactly that, just a funnel shaped cloud. And it is a rotating column of air. And the reason we can see it is because of the visible condensation. You don't necessarily always get that visible condensation cone. Sometimes it has to kind of interact with the ground before it starts, the wind starts pulling up like dirt and things like that. One distinct difference between a funnel cloud and a tornado is that a tornado actually touches the ground, whereas a funnel cloud, basically until it reaches the ground, it's a funnel cloud. Once it reaches the ground, it's a tornado. For all intents and purposes, treat them the same, call them in. Like if you're seeing a funnel cloud, like you need to go ahead and, one, take your preparedness action, make sure you're safe. And then 2, if you're the type of person to report stuff as a storm spotter, definitely call that in. Here's a tornado. I got this down in Oklahoma a handful of years back. Tornadoes, like funnel clouds, are rotating columns of air within a visible cone of condensation, or in this case, also debris. In this case, you can see it started in the bottom here to kind of pick up some of that Oklahoma red clay. So it started to kind of change the color of it a little bit there, but also the condensation that you can see. Tornadoes must touch the ground, otherwise they're funnel clouds, like we talked about. All manner and shapes and sizes can be seen with tornadoes, from little wispy rope-like to stovepipe shaped or wedge shaped. Some are very vertical, some can be very horizontal and kind of snaky. Most intense tornadoes are called wedge tornadoes. Those can be, not even necessarily discerned as a tornado because they're so wide. There's virtually like no frame of reference for you to be able to depict, oh yeah, that's where it is. It might just look like an intense, crazy thunderstorm, like wind blowing, rain falling. Unless you're far enough away and can really see that wedge tornado, you might be in the danger zone. There is oftentimes kind of a roaring or freight train noise associated with tornadoes. Excuse me, due to those intense rotating winds. And tornadoes are often accompanied by such a massive drop in pressure, it can make your ears pop. So if you see a funnel cloud or tornado, again, always seek shelter first, protect yourself, protect your family, and then if you can safely call it in, go for it. All right. I know we covered a lot of the more like tornado, really severe stuff in this module. Any questions? Anybody need to take a quick break? I'm going to take a quick water break myself here. Give it a minute or two, and then we'll keep on trucking otherwise. Everybody feeling good though so far? Like, is the pacing okay? I know I'm a big weather nerd, so I can plow through this stuff like crazy.
We could be on here for 12 hours. We wouldn't shut up.
Yeah, until my voice gives out or I crash. All right. Seeing no questions. Hopefully everybody's still hanging out. We will carry on. All right. So now we're going to kind of get into tornadoes yet a little bit deeper here. So again, the AMS definition of a tornado, like we talked about, it's a rotating column of air in contact with the surface, which sounds super boring, but it is what it is. Tornado intensity is often estimated based on wind speed and damage to structures using the enhanced Fujita scale. It used to just be the Fujita scale, which was really just only talking about wind, but over time it's developed into we have wind and we have damage, and they've come up with a slightly better scale for at least how to post-mortem classify these things. Anybody that's trying to especially on like social media or something like that, like tell you, oh, this looks like an EF3, like take that with a heavy grain of salt, probably a pinch of salt. Like you can't estimate that just by looking at something. You have to understand the wind speed and the damage to actually make that kind of determination. Yep. But Fujita, it's actually named for Tetsuya Theodore, or Ted Fujita, who is a prominent severe storms researcher that worked to understand thunderstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, and typhoons. He developed like I said, the original Fujita scale, and to this day it lives on in his name. Some tornadoes may have secondary vortices, also known as suction vortices, subvortices, multiple vortices, sometimes people just call them like sister twisters. There's a handful of different names. I think that it was either the one that recently went through Texas or the one that went through or near New Orleans actually had there were pictures of the main tornado, and then next to it was another smaller tornado. So this is one of those instances where you have these multiple vortices going on. Elgin, Nebraska, Elgin. But that was a major case. Like one was an EF2 and one was an EF3. It was two very strong tornadoes within a very close approximation to each other. Oops, sorry. So that can happen. It's really super scary. It's kind of rare. It's kind of awe-inspiring, but like it can be very, very, very destructive. Tornadoes have been recorded on every continent in the world, excluding Antarctica. But with climate change, that may change as well. So that's not a good thing. A vast majority of these do happen in the US, almost 1,000 per year on average. It has to do with our geography. Like I know Pete talked about that early on, about just kind of where we are latitude, longitude wise, and kind of the different, we've got mountains, we've got the Gulf, we've got coasts, we've got the Arctic air, we've got the dry, hot air. It all melds together here in the US really well. And tornadoes, like other severe and thunderstorm weather, can happen any time of year, anytime, day or night. Here is the EF scale. So EF0, EF1, typically 65 to 100 mile an hour winds, usually shorter lived, shorter tracked. These can occur in non-supercells. Supercells is just like, it's a higher classification for like very mature thunderstorms. But those account for about 83% of all tornadoes. Whereas EF2, EF3, this is where you're getting into the high end of tornadoes to the low end of a major tornado. That's 111 to 165 miles per hour. Tendency towards longer track and longer duration, typically associated with supercells. And again, you can kind of see also kind of the damage out there to the right. And then EF4 and EF5, which is less than or about 1% of all tornadoes, fortunately. 166 to 200 or more miles per hour winds. Track and duration tend to be long, or at least recurring, where they'll pick up and drop, but they'll go for a long ways doing this. And then these are developed from well-organized supercell storms. Again, just kind of a real quick overview and understanding, pretty straightforward. As you go up in the EF scale, the damage becomes higher and higher. Here's a better visual through like a neighborhood of what what that EF scale looks like. And this happens when the National Weather Service goes out after a storm and they do the damage assessment. They will take a look, in this case, like a neighborhood, and they will start kind of on the outskirts, like, okay, like not a lot of damage or very, very little, no damage out here, work their way towards the worst damaged area, and they will kind of evaluate that as they go. In this case, this tornado would have been ranked an EF5 because they got all the way down to EF5 type damage, where it was like the structure's completely gone, it's completely blown off the foundation. Basically, you're looking at bits of debris and concrete slabs. So even though, again, a lot of this was not EF5, there was this couple of houses here that got that EF5 damage. So in this location, it will be marked as an EF5 tornado. Something that was relearned and continues to be relearned, especially by newer chasers and spotters, is that tornadic winds often extend well beyond the condensation funnel. So in this case, in blue is where the condensation funnel actually is, whereas those damaging winds are a lot greater area. And again, if we go back and look at this, so yeah, the EF5 was right here, and maybe just the EF5 and EF4 areas were where that funnel was, but clearly there was reaching damage that went all the way out kind of to the outskirts of this neighborhood here. So again, there's obviously where the tornado is damaging, but there's a greater area around it, just like with hurricanes, where you can still get very damaging winds. During a tornado, go to your safe location, away from windows, on the lowest level of a sturdy building. If you are caught outside, get in a car, buckle up. If you've got the time, drive to a sturdy shelter, a sturdy building. Getting indoors, getting to an interior, again, away from windows, is always a better bet than being outside. If you're in an area that's got a storm shelter, use that, especially if you're in like a mobile home or prefabricated home. Like, please don't stay there. Those get rolled, they get torn apart. Like, I know some of my acquaintances and friends, there's like a clubhouse or something within, the trailer park, and that is an area that those folks can use as a shelter because there's an interior large room that's away from windows, like it's a downstairs kind of area for that. Some apartment complexes might have uh, like a facility like that. Maybe it's a laundry room that's on the bottom level that's sort of like back kind of out of the way. Every situation is different. So it's up to you to understand what you're looking for and to find that, know, and make that your plan. If you've got questions about it, even if it's like super specific to your exact situation, let us know. Talk to us, direct message us. Like, here's where I'm at. Here's the situation. Like, where would you recommend? And we'll give you our honest thoughts on that.
Yep.
So I don't remember who asked earlier, but this is the section where we talking about being stuck in a car, like what to do. This is that section here. So riding out a tornado doesn't mean you're always in the best place, no matter how you've planned your day. Things happen, stuff, the best laid plans get laid to waste kind of thing. It happens, but it's important to kind of think through those scenarios so that in case you do encounter those scenarios, you at least have kind of an idea of what you can do. So as the graphic on the right shows, being in a mobile home or a vehicle is definitely not advised. Again, if you're in a mobile home park, check to see if there's a shelter. Maybe in a nearby park, like here in Independence, up by Fire Station 1, we actually have a designated concrete reinforced storm shelter. So if people are out at the park, like, oh crap, I'm too far like from my car to get my family out to the car and then drive out of this, they can just run up to the shelter that we unlock, and then they can take shelter in there. Not all parks have that. Some do, and they're often not very well advertised, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Um, but check into that kind of stuff. Call your local parks department and ask, be like, hey, do we have any storm shelters in parks or around the city or whatever? Um, yeah, uh, know where those are. Um, if you are stuck in your car, driving away might be kind of a last resort. This is one of those, again, it's you have to make the choice that's right for you in the moment. What's the greatest threat? Do you have time to do it? And do you have time to do it safely? Um, this is obviously a hell of a situation to find yourself in. Um, but like I say here, if you are at least in your car, but you like there's no time, you don't have a way to drive away, kick your seat back, stay buckled in, try to protect your head, try to protect, like your stomach, your softer areas, but try to get down below that window line. So like in my truck, my window line sits right about here. Hopefully you guys can still hear. My window line sits about right here. So I would have to kick my seat back pretty far to get to an area where I would be below that window line. And what's important about that is, if you're going to be in a tornado, wind is going to throw debris through that window. And yeah, the window is going to shatter and debris can get in, but at least you're out of that direct line of where the wind is going to throw that debris through. It'll at least more kind of tumble down onto you instead of impact directly like a grenade, essentially. So getting below that window line, if at all possible, is key. At least if you're buckled in and your car gets rolled, it might be a little crazy and you might kind of be like a little puppet hanging, like if it gets rolled upside down or whatever, but at least you're protected. You're not bumbling around inside your car. It's not a good situation no matter how you cut it. So, I know it sounds stupid, but maybe if it's this time of year, maybe keep a hard hat in your car. I do. I actually keep two in my truck. They're underneath my bench seat in the back. My kids both know this. There's only been like one scenario where we happen to be out and about. And I was like, I don't know if we're necessarily going to make it home or not, but like you kids go ahead and put the helmets on. You know, there's enough space. You guys can get down like below the seat and stuff. So they know what the plan is. And it's one of those, like, it's scary to think about, but it's important to think about, because what if you get in that scenario? And I know I'm kind of soapboxing a little bit, but the whole purpose of this class is to hopefully illuminate a lot of things and get your thoughts going on, oh yeah, what are preparedness actions I can take so that you are prepared to a point where you're not even in that situation. And again, sometimes it happens. Hopefully it's like the absolute slimmest possibility that you're even in that particular situation. But again, it is a possibility. So think it through, know what your plan is, know what you need to do in that scenario. All right, storm damage. We talked about this when I kind of harped on like insurance and stuff like this, but this is just to kind of, now that we've kind of gone through the whole litany of everything, you know, before you start cleaning up, take photos of the damage to your home, to your belongings, to your vehicle. Check in with your neighbors, like maybe, you know, they might not think about it, but like for the purposes of making sure, because sometimes it's not right, but sometimes insurance companies will fight you on things. So taking pictures of the surroundings as well can help in that recovery phase. You know, make a list of damaged or lost items, gather any original receipts you might have. I do a lot of digital receipts. So like if I use a card, I automatically get a digital receipt for things. Receipts are always like a super great way to be like, this is exactly what it was. Most times you can at least approximate, especially with pictures of what the things were. But yeah, if you've got receipts, awesome. And then call your insurance agent, submit the claim. Don't wait on that. Do whatever you can. Email them, call them, blow their phone up until they're like, hey, we got it. Like, we got you in the system. Like, don't wait on it, man. Like the sooner you can get in on that, the sooner you're going to be able to start that recovery. And yeah, this graphic is from FEMA. So if you've got questions about making plans, again, there's a million resources out there. Prepare Metro KC. I think it's like ready.gov, FEMA. There's a lot of great websites for things to think through, especially if you're this kind of person that is well documented, like how to take all of that documentation and make it into something so you can just be like, here's my stuff, here's my pictures. Thank you, insurance. I'll see you soon. And then, you know, when it comes to severe weather, as long as you understand the risks, you should be able to plan accordingly. But if you don't have a plan, all you can do is what Mr. Ray Arnold says and basically just hold on to your butts. But hopefully this class will, again, highlight some of these things so that you have more than just a hold on to your butts kind of plan in place. All right, we are gonna jump into radar, but before I do that, I know I don't have like a question slide here, but were there any questions about the stuff that we just covered before we like get focused on radar? I just want to open it up real quick. Or if there's something that we have not covered that you wanted to. So once we get past radar, we've got kind of a bring it all together sort of final bit.
Mm-hmm.
Getting stuck in the basement after a tornado, no one can find us. So, okay, yes. Excellent question. Part of that planning process, I would say, is also having like a go bag. So even if it's just something that you just keep down in your shelter spot, and something that you can do, I'm kind of thinking through the thinking through the process here. One thing to know and be aware of is that using your phone to text instead of call. If you can text, that will have a much, much higher likelihood of getting through to somebody than making a phone call. And that has to do with bandwidth and how that signal goes out. Also, on that same thought process, it's also better to text somebody who's not in the damage area. So if you have, like for me, I have an out of town contact. It's my dad. He lives way out in Indiana. Obviously, he can't physically come here and help me. But if I can at least let him know, be like, Dad, my house is destroyed. I'm stuck, or whatever the case might be. he's in an area where he's not impacted. He can make phone calls. He can get on the internet. He can reach back locally here or other family and friends around to say, hey, here's what's going on. And it doesn't have to be that far away. I'm just saying that's one example. That's one that I have. My dad knows that if if I send a very specific set of like words or whatever, he knows, okay, it's time. Like I need to do the thing. Um, but in that go bag, another thing very important to have, and this is something I learned from CERT training, having a whistle so that you're not shouting, your voice gets hoarse, you breathe in more of that debris. Having a whistle though allows you to, you know, send out like that sound, and it's very loud, and it gets people's attention, especially like um, dogs that do like debris search and things like that. And teams will listen for those kinds of things. Sometimes our voices, like the way they reverberate, especially in like debris and things like that, it doesn't get out very well. But there's something about that frequency of like whistles that it's very high pitched. It can be heard a lot easier. Um, Again, that this is one of those like it's not a good scenario to be in, but yeah, it's absolutely a scenario. We've seen it on the news recently with these big tornadoes. Um, you you might, you know, kind of get stuck in that scenario. So at least in your go kit, and I don't want to get too deep into those, but look up like 72-hour kit, go kit, emergency kit. And again, those websites we've talked about, there's tons of great resources out there. Um, Pete, maybe you and I've got a lot going on today, but if you think about it and you can find like a couple of graphics, um, either this weekend or Monday, we will try to get something posted. I think this would be a good follow up to this class about posting about like go
Yeah.
preparedness kits and things like that. And that's something
Yeah.
that if you can find a class, whether it's online like this or in person, to take one of those, like how to build a kit, those classes are awesome. Actually, YouTube
Mhm.
has a bunch of them too.
Yeah.
There's a trillion ideas out there. As long as it works for you and your specifics, that's what counts. You know, you've got, if you need to have like medicine on hand, if you need to have snacks on hand, if you've got to have pet food on hand, whatever the scenario is, as long as you're thinking through those and preparing ahead of time, having that bag just ready to go, like by the staircase to go wherever, is awesome. Now,
Mhm.
second floor apartment with no option on lower level. Um, yeah, a bathtub. Honestly, bathrooms are always usually a really good a really good bet because there's plumbing, and just because of the way they're constructed, they're usually a bit more like dense construction materials. So yeah, they're usually by way of that a bit more reinforced. So yeah, getting in a bathtub, blankets, couch cushions, couch pillows, something you can just kind of like put padding between you and the exterior, you know, in case your roof gets ripped off, in case like uh, sheetrock falls, different things like that. That'll help. Again, having like a hard hat might be good. Um, but again, also having that pack with you, having that little go bag. I wish I knew where it was because I just helped cleaned up in the basement yesterday. But I gave my daughter a little, it's a little Molly pack. It's literally like, it's like the size of like a piece of paper, but it's like it's this thick. And I told her that she needs to put stuff in it in case, you know, that's her pack. That's her little, I can grab this and go. It'll have the essentials and things like that. But yeah, definitely don't hesitate to check back on our socials. We'll definitely follow up sometime in the next few days with information about that stuff. That's a really, really, really good question.
Mhm. Karen, I just wanted to add a second part to it. Sometimes it may come down to timing. If you have more time, maybe going to a shelter might be a good idea in your particular case. Apartment buildings, I know that you know what Justin touched on and everything. Sometimes it just kind of depends on the apartment building itself. Some of them have their own shelters, some of them don't. But if you have time, it might be something to consider. But if it's not something you can consider, then everything that Justin told you very much applies.
Yeah, I was going with the worst case scenario there where like you've just got to act. But yeah, to Pete's point, yeah, if you've got a friend that's got a basement or something that's maybe just like, you know, 2 minutes from your apartment, be like, hey, you know, like there's some nasty weather coming in. You mind if I like, you know, hang out with you for a couple hours until this thing kind of blows over. That might be an option as well. Fortunately, I've got a lot of like friends and family and things like that that live relatively close. So even though my sister-in-law is in an apartment, she's close enough to several of us that if she needed to not be in the apartment, she could probably just, if she had the time, come over and hang out, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, absolutely. If you have questions about any of that stuff after this presentation, light us up on socials. We will absolutely follow up with ideas, thoughts. Give us your specifics if you've got questions. But hopefully, at least now we've planted that seed in your head and you can take that from here and start looking into that.
Mhm.
All right. So, radar, brain shift here. Radar can definitely be confusing. I get that, especially if you've not really got like a prior background in weather. James Spann, one of my idols in the weather space, says most people often equate looking at radar images with looking at a bucket of spilled paint. So this section, I hope to fix that. Our goal is to obviously help you better understand what you're seeing on TV, social media, websites, smartphone apps. Everything's got radar. Even Windows now has a better, like if you've got the little weather notification on there and you click on it, it pulls up a little radar now. Like everything's got radar these days, it seems like, which is great. I think that's, even if it's basic radar, it's still something.
Yeah.
But with understanding radar, you can hopefully make better decisions before a warning is issued. So in relation to the question about do I have time? Well, hopefully if you know, okay, this is one of those days, like I looked at the outlook, I know it's coming. I'm looking at radar. It looks like it's probably going to be half an hour before this thing gets here. Maybe that's where you make that decision. Okay, I'm going to call my friend up that I talked to earlier that said, hey, I'm on my way. Like, it's getting to be crunch time here. Or you look at your radar app and you're like, no, I really need to go ahead and just get into shelter before, the sirens go off and everything. But hopefully radar can be one of those tools where with everything else, it's kind of your advanced warning, as it were.
Mhm.
Radar, a little history, literally stands for radio detection and ranging. Weather radar was developed in World War II for the initial purpose of trying to track warplanes in rain or thunderstorms. Observers noticed that their targets were obscured by rain, leading to additional developments in radar technology. So military and meteorologists began using radar to better forecast weather in the 1950s, and the technology essentially is still the same. There's just been advancements, improvements, coupled with satellites now, but essentially it still operates the same. It's just been refined. These are the different NexRad radar locations. The primary ones. There are small ones. Some universities, also many airports have their own very short range ones, but these are the National Weather Service locations. And as you can see, and this is one of the things I talked about we would start getting into. If you notice here, this is talking about feet above ground level. So you can see, yeah, these radars have really good coverage, but generally speaking, they're only looking at starting at 4,000 feet on up. And this is where being a spotter plays a huge role in the weather warning and information dissemination process. Radars are awesome and they can see a lot, but they can only see so much. They can't see like the bottoms of storms in a lot of cases, unless it happens to roll right over the radar site itself. Usually wherever that signal is already pretty high up. That's just a limitation of it. That's why when you hear something on TV, like we have a spotter confirmed tornado on the ground, that means somebody in the field put eyes on it and says, yeah, there's a tornado on the ground, versus radar indicated, which is, well, we're pretty sure, but we're having to rely on the radar to tell us. And sometimes that's all you've got. But this is my plead to, I'm not asking you to go out and drive in storms or anything nutty like that, but even if you're just at home and you can be like, oh yeah, this is what I see going on, you can let National Weather Service know. That's awesome. They love that kind of stuff. They love adding all that data in there, because the more data they get from all these different places, they can eventually improve the software and everything that drives these these products, and it helps them determine, okay, well, this is what we're seeing on radar, and we know from all these other types of reports, they can build all that stuff in.
Mhm.
And here is a more of a visual example of how those radar beams work. I'm not going to get into the super nitty gritty, but just so you know, there's two modes. There's the AV set mode, which is scanning from bottom to top, creates an entire what they call a composite image. This is like the normal scan pattern, like day to day, it's scanning always bottom to top, top to bottom, the whole range. But when weather gets more dicey, when things are looking more like severe oriented, they'll set it to sales mode, which just scans kind of the bottom elevation. So it's not wasting as much with the top. So they're not as concerned with that. They're really trying to focus on the stuff that's closer to the ground, the stuff that's actually going to impact people. And that's all the different modes are there. Like we talked about, it's a radio transmission. It sends the signal out, bounces off of whatever, comes back. That's how it works. It's like a ping, if you think like submarines, kind of, except for submarines use sound. This uses radio waves. And they have again made improvements. So now they have what's called dual polarization. So it requires a little bit of understanding of how radio waves work, but radio waves can be oriented. They're usually on a plane or an axis. So the conventional was this kind of like this plane, but with the dual pole, they have this plane and this plane. And that, in a nutshell, just gives it a higher accuracy of what's going on. Kind of like it's going from like, say, like old school, like tube TV to like HD. Not quite as dynamic or not as dramatic, but you get the picture. With dual pole, we've had the advent of a lot of different other radar things that we can do because it can differentiate things between like light rain, heavy rain, small hail, large flakes. You can really get those differences pinned down. And as you can see over here on the right, there's a few reflectivity is the old one. That's the one that's been around the longest. But with dual pole, you get velocity, the dual polarization, which can be used to determine the shape of hydrometers. So again, it tells those nitty gritties between like rain, hail, snow, and debris. And then precipitation depiction, which is very good at estimating like how much rain has fallen. So like you can see here, the different altitudes, like we talked about, there's usually like a freezing line with these tall storms. So depending on where at in that range from bottom to top that the radar is looking at, you might see rain or hail or snow reflected back, aka reflectivity, or in this case, the precipitation depiction. So here is kind of like the introduction to how radar can sort of tell you what's going on, even if you're only looking at a static image. Again, this type of warning box is a polygon. We covered that earlier. You can see that polygon shape there. And it's important to know what you're looking at in just a few seconds. This might be, you know, the life and death scenario, or that decision where, depending on where you're at and what you're looking at, like if I'm in Harrisonville, I probably don't have necessarily time to get to my friend's house. But if I'm in like Garden City, yeah, I probably got, depending on how fast this thing's going, I probably got some time to maybe get to a better shelter. This image is the composite reflectivity mode. And over on the right here, it just shows population density, which I'm not really going to get into. That's just additive information here. But this is the same storm. And so as we're looking at all of this crazy information here, okay, I know it's in reflectivity mode because it's, you know, the color scheme here. It also tells me that it's only looking at the 0.5 angles. That in radar, the 0.5 is like, that's the bottom, that's the closest to the ground that you can get it. You also can see here this kind of blanked out area. That is where the radar itself is. And it has sort of this dead zone around it that it can't really pick anything up. It hasn't gone far enough out to be useful. So I know depending on how storms look, you might be like, oh my God, there must be like a tornado or something like that. It's not. It's just where the radar is. There's always a dead zone right wherever the radar sits. This image is obviously a little bit higher resolution than this image. So you can kind of see a little bit better. You can kind of tell, oh yeah, there's obviously heavy stuff in here. There's also this kind of lull in the middle. It just, the brighter colors, there, the heavier precipitation, kind of maybe the more severe it might be. And this is a tornado warned cell because that's a red box. What else can it tell us here? Okay, this is in velocity mode, which is almost always greens and reds for the most part, but you can see there's a scale up here. It can get into like pinks and blues. But so if this is the same storm, we're just zoomed in on that tornado warning. And if you had to take a guess, where would you be looking? And I would want to direct your eyes right where that green and the red are very tightly together, right in here. I don't know if you guys can actually see the mouse or not. Can you guys see the mouse? Maybe not. But the green and the red couplet is right there to the right of Westline and to the left of Freeman, to the southeast of Cleveland, right there in that little box. Okay, cool.
Yep, there you go.
And that is a couplet where the wind is moving both towards and away from the radar site in a very close approximation. These types of things, these couplets, are what will kick off a radar indicated tornado. And the tighter that is, the more confident they can be that there is a tornado. And that's also a good way. So if you've got a radar app that allows you to swap between reflectivity and velocity, you can really pinpoint and start to develop an understanding as to, okay, like, yeah, I can start to see that even in these static images. It takes a little while, but over time you can kind of get used to those. This is another, again, we've got reflectivity, and then this one is also velocity, but the difference here is that instead of getting like the red and green tight together, we're looking at just a straight line wind event, not a tornado, because we've got these really high intensity on the scale down here. If you're looking at, it goes from the middle outward. You've got these increasing in velocity. You got the dark green, the light green, the blue, and then into the dark blue. Very, very high end winds. Some of these darker areas, these dark blues, were like 100 plus miles per hour. And this is that windstorm from June 15th that I showed you, that big tree that was toppled over by that person's house. This is that storm. So again, you can see, even just from a static image, you can kind of see, okay, well, yeah, it looks like, it's kind of bowing this direction. Those bows kind of tell you what way this thing is going. And in this case, when you kick it from reflectivity to velocity, you can directly see, yeah, that velocity, it's moving real fast. And these polygons here were indicating severe thunderstorm warnings because of those high winds. Now, even though, again, on radar, this was showing like 100-mile plus winds aloft, that didn't necessarily translate to on ground, but it was still high enough that it reached that 58 mile per hour or greater threshold. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now we have reflectivity. The middle is precipitation, and then the right is velocity. So again, it's literally all the same image, except for it's the three different types of product, like radar product, that we're looking at. So in this, you can see this hook echo, very telltale sign of a tornado. So even just looking at this, at the reflectivity image, gives you a good indication. Okay, that's a pretty solid hook there. There might be a tornado. Well, you can also check that or help validate that when you look at precipitation in the middle here. The precipitation, you go from light rain to moderate to heavy rain up through like the greens and orange and red. But then you've got this like pink and purpley kind of area. That's hail. So because of these strong updrafts associated with tornadoes, as we've talked about, there are oftentimes hail cores coupled with a tornado. So if you've got a good section of hail that you can see in a radar image, and you've got that paired with that hook echo, you can be pretty confident you're looking at an active tornado. And again, this is all information just from looking at a static image. And then going back to what we talked about in the previous slide with velocity, that wind speed. Again, we've got the green and the red tight together, but we've also got that pink and blue now. That is a very, very strong wind back and forth in that tight area. And you can almost kind of see how it's kind of spiraled around. So I'm hoping this is making a lot of sense. And absolutely, if there's any questions as we're going, we're covering a lot of ground real quickly here, but I'm hopeful that you're seeing, okay, yeah, this is general radar coupled with, okay, yeah, now I can see there's hail aloft, and I'm looking at the wind speeds. Like, absolutely, there's a tornado on the ground, or at least a tornado getting ready to hit the ground. And of course, it's reinforced by the fact there is a tornado warning. And also, as a rule of thumb, notice how much lightning there is associated with this particular storm. Very powerful storms, especially ones that have a higher propensity to produce a tornado, are often coupled with a lot of lightning strikes. So if you're looking at a wide image and you notice one area's got a bit more lightning than the other, like zoom in on that area, and you might start to notice patterns where those might start to be, they might start to look like they have a little bit of that spin to them. Again, that's a general rule, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb to keep in mind as you're looking at radar. Again, this is just to reinforce what that couplet is. It's that those bright colors, the moving away from the radar, moving toward the radar, they're in that close proximity together. The tighter it is and the brighter those colors, or the more intense those colors are on those scales, the better idea you have of that rotation. And I'm going to skip that bottom image because that's another product called correlation coefficient. It's something that, as you really get into knowing radar, it's kind of a wash. It helps you determine a debris signature, which is usually if a tornado is going through like a neighborhood or something, even if it's dark out, like that's your like, absolutely, yeah, there's a tornado on the ground. But I don't expect you guys to take that away from you. That's a really complicated view to look at. And I just want you guys to really focus on reflectivity, precipitation ID, and velocity. If you know those three really well, you're doing miles better than the average population.
Yeah.
So here's just another tornado. This is an isolated one. It's not in a line of storms, but again, you've got that hook echo. You can see this is reflectivity and velocity. So you've got the hook echo, you have the lightning, talked about that. And then on the velocity, you can see it's not a great quality image, but yeah, you've got the green and the red, but you've also got some of those like blues in there too. So another thing to take a note is that if you hold up your hand and treat it as your thumb is the hook part of it, just hold your hand like that, and wherever the hook is, whatever way, like if I were to align my hand the same way that the storm is, that tells me this storm is traveling, generally speaking, in that direction. So if you're looking at it as a still image, you should be able to tell, oh, well, yeah, it looks like that storm is moving kind of east southeast. Does that make sense to everybody? Kind of how, I know it's like super basic and it's like some Boy Scout kind of crap, but as an Eagle Scout. But that's one of those things where I've found that if people can even visually imagine like their hand, however that hook is oriented with the rest of that storm, you get a really good sense as to what direction things are going from a still image. Okay, these are just some other types of hook echoes. Some of these are a bit easier to see than others, but you're not always going to get these like classic, like super well defined. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. These are kind of from left to right, sort of like, okay, not as great, really kind of hard to tell. But again, it's knowing what to look for. Again, notice more lightning here by Calmet, not necessarily New Orleans, even though, you got some yellows and oranges and reds in here. There's a little bit of a hook there to the east of Calumet, just north of Violet. And because of that kind of hook direction, that particular one is kind of heading like east by maybe a little southeast. And that's the reflectivity with the velocity. This is just, both of these are reflectivity. Now, I will say, usually in reflectivity, it's a lot harder to tell that there's hail. But in this case, this is such a severe or such a strong reflectivity pulse. You can almost bet that some of this purple and pink, like the precipitation depiction, indicates there's hail aloft. So you've got a little bit of lightning, you've got that hail, and you've got, there's a little bit of a hook there. And this one's going kind of east by northeast. Now, this one on the far right, it's kind of messy looking, to be honest with you. It's hard to tell that there is a hook. This is because in this image, it's much further from the radar site. And so it's much higher up looking, and it doesn't see as much of that hook, that spin down low in the lower atmosphere. So because it's further away, it is harder to tell. But again, if you were to switch from reflectivity to precipitation and velocity modes, you would be able to quickly see that, yeah, it's definitely got some of that rotation along with it. So yeah, this is my spotter tip. Like I said, look for the lightning here. Both these images on the right are the same storm from the same timestamp. So you should hopefully be able to identify the tornado warning polygon and the hook echo in velocity mode. And all I did was I removed the lightning layer for both of these to make it a little bit easier to see. But because of my lightning tip, I wanted to express that. So hopefully, yeah, you guys can see, obviously, here's our polygon warning, that red box. You can see, okay, yeah, this is, you can kind of see the line of storms. And in this case, there's a lot of rain going on here. Not an easy way, because this is pretty well zoomed out. It's hard to see necessarily where that hook echo is, kind of to the north of Keogh here, northeast. But then you look in velocity mode, you're like, oh man, yeah, no, I mean, you can literally see how those two things kind of hook around each other right there. It's pretty straightforward, I hope. But again, I wanted to highlight the amount of lightning around that particular section of the storm. Just again, rule of thumb. But all these things combined from a static image tell you, oh yeah, okay, I can see that. And because the polygon box, you can kind of see it's going, again, kind of east by northeast. Any questions? Am I losing anybody here? Hoping this is all just kind of building from slide to slide here. If you got any questions, absolutely just chime in anytime. Like now. But yeah, in a nutshell, if you've got a radar that can show you those different things, you can learn a lot, especially swapping between those 2 or 3 views as storms come through your area. Take a look at those. You can really learn a lot about kind of how storms in your area work. Some of that's driven, obviously, weather, the primary driver, but your geography, what kind of buildings are around you. All those things play in, and you might notice patterns where, well, this area, the storms always kind of go around this way or that way. They do different things, but as you watch different storms, and you'll know over time, as storms come from different directions, they act differently too, because of how they interact, again, with the geography, with the man-made objects and things like that. But you'll start to pick up patterns and get a really good idea as to the specifics, like very, very locally to you. All right, not having heard any quote. What about on radar? I'm sorry. Oh, explain the best way to depict convective storms versus non. Well, Well, usually with convection, with that up and down, that's where you start to see more of that lightning. So I would say, generally speaking, with thunderstorms that are more convective, you're probably going to see more lightning. And therefore, again, if you have the option to see lightning on a display like that, that's a really good, very general good indicator to kind of like, oh yeah, I'm starting to see a lot more lightning with this section. Like that's probably something you want to keep a look at if you're kind of in that path. That's not to dismiss the other stuff, but just to like in the moment, again, everything changes over time. But I would say that's my personal opinion. With more convective storms, you usually see a bit more lightning. If you don't see, or if you can't see lightning in a particular weather app, though, I guess the best way would be to like look for those brighter colors, especially when they're really kind of packed in together. In our area here in Kansas City, kind of proper, we get a lot of those line storms, and you might see little sections of the storm that kind of like protrude forward and kind of curl a little bit. Um, Anything that's more convective and more mature is generally going to have some more of those kind of brighter colors on radar. If they've got spin to them, you potentially could start to see those sort of like hooks. And if you have a lightning layer available in that view, um, wherever there's more clusters of lightning, I think is usually a pretty good indicator. But Pete, feel absolutely free to weigh in on that too. That's kind of what the things I look for.
I would agree. One thing to back up just a little bit, if you're watching a storm and you see the lightning increasing, that's a good chance it's strengthening. Versus if you're seeing less lightning, that's a pretty good idea that the storm is coming apart in its down cycle. Um, and I don't know, that's fairly basic in terms of ideas, but it's always as we keep noting, rule of thumb, it's a good idea to watch for stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of everything we've talked about so far today. Is it's kind of taking, even though this stuff can seem very basic, like okay, yeah, the clouds look scary, yeah, there's more lightning, but like those are the indicators, and those are usually, especially like Pete said, if it's becoming more prevalent or less prevalent, you're looking at a ramping up or a lessening of the convection therein. And I hope that answers, at least in part, your question. Besides actually looking at like wind maps and things like that, which can require, I mean, I get a little confused by wind maps because there's all kinds of different products and things like that. Wind maps and pressure would probably also give you an indication, but those also update a bit slower. So that's more of a like after it happens, going back and looking at research versus
Mhm.
looking at it live, because there's so much data coming in. Those feeds can often be minutes and minutes and minutes behind what's going on. So I think sticking to those, especially visual basics or even basics of radar, are going to be your best keys.
Yep.
Yeah,
Seconded.
absolutely, man. So I'm gonna go ahead and truck forward. But again, if there's any questions that you guys think of, even if it's something we talked about at the very beginning, let us know. We're getting close to the end here, y'all. I know we're kind of past winter, but I think it's a good time to kind of like, well, now that we're past winter, at least to kind of get your brain in the thought for maybe next season. Prepare for winter storms by checking your emergency kit. This emergency kit for winter weather should not be the same as your like thunderstorm tornado kit. Stay off roads during and after a blizzard. If you must drive, don't crowd the plow. That's a big thing you'll see a lot of people say, and I know it sounds simple, but there are people out there that like will just ride right behind them or be trying to go around them. Like, just let the plows do their thing, man. Like, that's what they're out there doing. They don't want to be out there either.
Yeah,
But
true enough.
clear snow and ice off of fire hydrants if you can, so that fire departments can access them. You don't think about houses catching fire in the middle of like snow and fire. You don't equate, but it happens a lot more than you'd think, and it can be very devastating, especially if fire departments are driving around. They're like, well, I know it's supposed to be at this property, but like, where is it at on the road? Like, I can't see it. We
Mhm.
don't get necessarily that much snow, but even just like clearing out a little bit around it or off the top can help them out. Um, using unsafe heating devices indoors can cause carbon monoxide poisoning. So know the safety factors there. Know what can be used indoors versus not. Um, Prepare for winter weather by gathering your emergency supplies. With anything, the further ahead that you plan and the more that you've thought about it and plan it out, then it makes it way easier down the road. And like I said, seasons change, so should either your car's disaster kit, your office disaster kit, your home disaster kit. Be sure to update yours for each season, or just have one that you swap out for the different seasons. Oh yeah, good point. I should probably add that. Yeah, clear snow off of your car, especially the roof and stuff, because as you're driving down the highway, sheets of ice, because you heat up your car and there's the powder snow on top, but then that base layer by the metal of your car can turn into like little sheets of ice and blow off and be very damaging to cars behind them if they get hit with that. That could suck.
Yep.
Oh yeah, and blackout tip. This can be for winter weather, but it can really for any type of blackout. Dim the brightness on your cell phone settings to save battery life, or iPad or laptop or whatever. This is something we often contend with in our area, especially with having kind of a metropolitan area, or like the city island, as they call it.
Yeah.
Depending on how much warm air there is, and by warm, I don't necessarily mean like balmy. It can literally be just above freezing is warm air in this case. But depending on how much and where it's kind of at in the atmosphere can dramatically affect what hits the ground. And this is where people get really frustrated with NWS forecasts or the people on TV. It's very hard to account for exactly how the whole air, aloft is going to pan out that day. There might be a little pocket of heat, because of the city. There's this little pocket of warm air that's making everything fall as sleet in a particular area, dramatically cutting back like the areas right around them to get like inches and inches of snow. Maybe they only got like 2 inches of snow, but before that they got like, you know, a couple inches of sleet in addition.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just to show you how, again, the more warmth, obviously the snowflakes are going to melt. And then if it's a narrower layer of it, they have a chance to cool back down. This is where we will talk about kits just a little bit. Winter weather is always, because it's different than like the rest of the year. That's why I highlighted this, but things to take a look at, make sure there's plenty of water, shovels, food, appropriate clothing, stuff for your pets, chargers, even important documents if, you've got to, take off from your house for a while because like power is just like out for a long time, batteries, flashlights. There is a wrench there, and I will tell you why. It is important if your house is damaged to turn off the gas on the outside. If you don't know how, I understand. I'm just saying, if you do understand how that works and you know where that shut off is, that can be very helpful for saving your house from further damage and things like that, from possibly things catching fire or rupturing a gas line and things like that. Your car kit's probably going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a slimmed down version, probably just for you. But again, clothing, chargers, cables, stuff to undig your vehicle. Kitty litter works really good. Rock salt, food and water, scrapers. And then, if you've got like super active like outdoor pets or things like that, help them out too. If it's going to be super cold for a long time, get them a cute little hoodie or a scarf, or even like the little boots and things like that, especially like if they primarily exist outside. And then again, know what's safe to use inside versus outside for heat.
Mm-hmm.
You do not want to use any of those listed there, like gasoline heater, propane heater, natural gas heater, charcoal heater indoors. I hope that that's very straightforward, but there are people that do it. Safely enjoying winter recreation. The key here is really just kind of limit your time outdoors. The cold can really sap the energy out of you a lot more than uh, everyday weather. Same with extreme heat. Also limiting your caffeine and mood altering substances. The beer guys that are at football games and stuff like that, they're probably going to end up with frostbite in places they wish they didn't have frostbite when they get home. Like, oh, I feel fine. It's warm. I'm good. No, you're an idiot. Dress appropriately, real straightforward. Beware of overexerting yourself. Even if you're like the most fit person, shoveling snow is one of those things that, again, because being in the cold, it takes so much more for you just simply to exist in the cold. Your body's already overworking itself, and then adding that extra work to it. People have dropped dead from heart attacks from trying to like do too much outside in the snow. Just be cautious. I saw a chat here. If you get trapped in highway traffic due to wrecks, what does your baby need? Yeah, if you know you're gonna have like kids and stuff with you, like I'm regularly carting my youngest to and from like daycare and things like that. That's something I need to plan for. Like obviously I've got my stuff, but do I have stuff for her? Does she have food? Does she have water? Does she have clothes, blankets? Do I have an iPad? Did I bring the iPad that's charged so she can play a game for a while? Like, yeah, and once you have your kit, don't just assume that like once you've got it by like, Halloween for your winter, like as your situation changes day to day, like be aware that like you may need to modify that based on whatever you've got going on that day. So pull something out if it doesn't make sense, add stuff to it. All of these things should be like living in the sense that they should always be adapted to whatever you need that makes sense. Yeah, diapers. Yeah, you do not want to get stuck in a car with a child like that and not be able to take care of that issue. It's going to get bad for several reasons that I don't really feel like we need to get into. But yeah, you would want to be able to dispose of that properly for health reasons, sanitary reasons. Dressing for cold weather, they're definitely different depending on how cold it is. You don't want to dress for extreme cold if it's going to be like 38 and like just a little windy. You would want to dress like this guy on the left here for chilly weather. Maybe a couple layers. That outer layer to keep the wind and rain out. Warm shoes. But then as it gets colder, you add layers. You add more like waterproofing. You cover more of your skin as it gets colder. That's really the gist there. That's the best way to go about it. Warning signs of hypothermia, good to know. It can be one or all of these or a mixture, but you've got confusion, shivering, difficulty speaking, sleepiness, and stiff muscles. Um, Obviously, again, just being outside, moving around, things, your muscles get stiff and sometimes you're cold and you start to shiver. But if these things start to compound or become uncontrollable, like you can't get yourself to stop shivering, like your muscles are tightening to a point where now it's difficult to actually maneuver or walk around. Be very aware of that. Try to get yourself out of that situation as fast as you can. I know it's another fun graphic, but literally doing the walking like this down here below, this kind of like keeping yourself a bit more straight up and down on one leg, kind of doing the penguin waddle, shuffling your feet can really help improve your ability to walk on slick surfaces. Hopefully you don't even have to do it, just avoid it altogether. But if you do, obviously shoveling off what you can, putting out the sand and ice melt, all of that helps. But if you have to like go from work to your car across a nasty parking lot, pay attention to that bottom graphic there, how he's kind of aligned his body weight on one leg and sort of is sliding his feet along, keeping that body alignment in place. I like this one, safe driving in wintry conditions. This guy says, if you rarely drive on snow, just pretend you're taking your grandma to church and there's 2 platters of biscuits and 2 gallons of sweet tea in a glass jar in the back seat. She's wearing a new dress and holding a crock pot full of gravy. Basically, like, go slow, take your time, don't drive crazy, don't overcorrect, you know, Keep Nana and the gravy separate. You don't want to merge those two things. You're going to have very unhappy Nana in a very dirty car. But yeah, leave early, take it easy, don't overcorrect, go slow, headlights on, buckle up, have your winter emergency kit in the vehicle, accessible, not in the trunk. It should probably be like sitting on the floorboards or something. Leave plenty of extra space between you and the vehicle in front of you, and move over for emergency vehicles. Questions about winter weather? Probably not. We all just got through it mostly. We might have another fourth bout of winter because it's what we do, but
Holding your hair dryer outside will not make winter not come.
no, blowing real hard doesn't really help.
Yeah, doesn't help. Trust me, I've tried.
All right. So this is a section I put together. It's more spotter centric stuff, but it's more of thinking in the way that a spotter does. It's still good information, even if you're not planning on being the type of person that reports stuff. But hopefully, at least these thought processes will help keep you on your toes for severe weather. It's more than being aware. It's more than just submitting MPing reports and pictures and videos online. And it's more than being out in the field. It's really about educating ourselves, but also those around us, so that we can all better prepare. We often use hashtags like weather aware, weather ready, be prepared. And those three are really at like the core of that philosophy and that mindset for kind of what we try to do.
One thing I was going to add real quick
Yeah.
is if you ever hear somebody perpetuating a myth about the weather, getting people educated is always one of our biggest things. And if hearing stories about people saying things like, well, we don't get hit by tornadoes because of, we're in a we're in a hole, or there's a mound over here or something like that, it's all luck in the end. You haven't got hit because you didn't win the lottery. That's why.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, well, tornadoes don't hit big cities. I mean, look at New Orleans. They took basically a direct hit just a couple days ago. Like, yeah, it happens. Like, don't say it doesn't. It may not have recently or for a while, but it can.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what weather should spotters pay attention to, or what weather should people pay attention to? And literally, and I mean this a little tongue in cheek, but also very seriously, everything. Like, just because it's nice when you leave the house doesn't mean that it's going to be that way all day. As we've talked about ad nauseum, weather's dynamic. Things change. Severe weather happens anytime, day or night, any day of the year. It's dynamic, it's ever changing. So yeah, during warmer months, a cloud can turn into a storm, can become severe, produce a tornado in less than an hour. July 2015 is an example. Be sure to be checking for updates on those more higher risk days. So if you're looking for those outlooks, if you're looking for, if you follow National Weather Service and they put out that outlook in the morning and it's one of those like yellow, orange, red days, that should be an indicator. Okay, I need to check back more frequently today than any other day to keep myself aware of what's going on. If the skies are starting to darken when, it's not nighttime, try to get a weather update, see what's going on. Like, those are the things, like start thinking in that way. And then these things will automatically set you in motion to be in a better position to know what's going on. Yeah. And just because the sun goes down does not mean that a storm will necessarily weaken. Weather fatalities in 2020. We've got all the different iterations, all of the different things we talked about, except for rip currents. That's not really something that we talk about here. I feel like heat is really beat over the head a lot, but it's important. I don't have it in here just because I feel like NWS does an incredible job of talking about heat in the summer months and stuff. But obviously, we also don't have hurricanes, but flood, lightning, tornado, heat, winter weather, cold weather, wind. These are big deals. Here's a map from, this is all of 2021, all of these severe weather reports. So you've got wind and wind damage, confirmed tornado, and then severe hail. So just across the nation, you can see Kansas City, we get quite a bit. actually last year was even less than years previous. Sometimes like all of Missouri is just completely covered in dots. So even though last year was kind of like a quiet year, there's still a ton of stuff. Missouri alone had 1,200 severe weather reports. Again, that's just the severe, not including all the outlying stuff. That's severe specifically. And you can see March through August is pretty consistent. And we do often see a bit of a spike sometimes right in December. For whatever reason, we have a couple days where temperatures will ramp up for a day. And so, yeah, you get really, really big weather dynamics where you go from cold to warm back to cold. So you can get tornadoes. We've seen it more and more recently. Now, we've talked a lot about, go get your outlooks, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, how do you get that? And this is going to cover that. Weather radios, obviously, they're, as long as you can program it correctly, you should be able to get a weather forecast 24/7. Ham radios, little handheld radios, often they have like a weather band on them, or you can at least tune to the frequency to listen in. But primarily follow NWS Kansas City and the Storm Prediction Center. They've got, their websites, Facebook, Twitter. Their socials are really good. They do a very, very good job of being consistent, putting out updates. Follow a local news, a TV news station. Again, they're on TV. They've got their own website. They've got a Facebook, a Twitter. Sometimes they have phone apps like there's like the KCTV5 Storm app and stuff like that. Whatever works for you, whatever your favorite flavor is, do it. Whatever, if it makes sense to you, absolutely.
Yeah. I wanted to add a couple of things about the TV stuff.
Yeah, man.
In regards to when you see the warnings on the TV, I believe a couple of years ago, all the local stations agreed to use the same colors.
Yes.
To ensure that they're not confusing people. So basically, like yellow, severe thunderstorm, red, tornado, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I can confirm that because at the yearly the weather meetings that we do, the IWS, they collectively, as the TV station said, we're all trying to provide the same information. This isn't something we should be competing at. So they've uniformed their colors. So yeah, yellow is usually like severe storm oriented. Red is usually tornado oriented for like watches, and then you've got like orange for like severe thunderstorm warning, and then it's like a darker red for like tornado warning.
Yeah.
Now the flooding and stuff like that, there's a lot of different like watches and warnings, but at least the core stuff like that has all been like, if you go from 4 to 5 to 9 to 41, as far as the severe thunderstorm watch and warning and tornado watch and warning, the color scheme should all be the same across the board. So even if you're flipping channels, you should basically be able to get the same information across that board.
Yep. One other thing I'll note real quick is a lot of stations lately have been doing a really good job of this. They'll say, be weather aware. If you watch the weather in the morning, before you take off for work or anything, if they happen to mention those words, that's clue number one right there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. That's what we're talking about, being weather aware. So yeah, things are great right now. It's nice. It's morning, blah, 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 but be weather aware. Like as the day progresses, like start to check back for updates because we expect things to change throughout the day, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
There's also other trusted people and groups on social media like us, hopefully for you guys. There's private meteorologists and forecasters. There's a lot of good ones out there. Weather enthusiasts. Just make sure their weather information checks out. Like vet them against known sources. Sometimes it's easier to talk to, not like the news station because they interact with so many people, or NWS because they have to interact with so many people. Sometimes finding a one-off or a team or something like that, like Pete and I are more than happy to try and get with you directly. Like even if it's, again, something that we don't know, if we can find an answer, point you in the right direction, or ask somebody else and then get back with you, we're happy to do that. If you would rather go through us than talk to NWS or talk to a news station, I mean, that's what we're here for. If you want to do that, awesome. If not, that's cool. As long as you're informed, that's all we care about.
Yep.
I know we've talked about it. There's phone weather apps. So Red Cross has one, especially for some different threats on there. There's Radar Scope, which is a lot of the images that I've used so far, which is a paid app, but it provides a lot of high quality information.
Yeah.
I'm not sponsored by them or whatever. If you're asking my opinion, I recommend Radar Scope.
Yeah. Seconded.
One Weather is also really good. Um, that there's a lot of good products in there, especially like future forecasting and things that they've kind of got it set up to where it's pretty easy to understand. Weatherbug's still around. It still works good. Weather Underground is a good one. AccuWeather, I think AccuWeather might have kind of combined or bought one or more of these, so AccuWeather might not be its own thing anymore. But My Radar is another one I know that's out there. Storm Track, and I don't know if Arcus still exists, but at one point it was, and it was a very simple but like understandable product.
Yeah, I don't think Arcus exists anymore.
That's a shame.
Yeah, but I'll throw in the Weather Channel. They've got a pretty good one.
Mhm.
Let's see who else. I know there's another company called Weather Nation. Their app is so-so, but let's see. There's a fairly unique one I found not too long ago called Weatherology, and it's actually fairly nice. That one works well. What you want to compare it to is whether or not these people or these apps can provide warnings for you. And there's plenty of settings on there that they can where you can go through and find whether or not they active warnings for you or anything like that. In addition to your phone's WEA system, which can also activate warnings for you. And a really quick note about those WEA warnings, if you have it set to the extreme level, not only will it give you tornado warnings, I think it was just this past year where they changed the severe thunderstorm warnings to where they have slightly different tier levels now. If it's a severe thunderstorm warning where they're thinking at least 80-mile-an-hour winds could be possible, that will also trigger your alert on your phones now.
Yeah. So yeah, just to kind of sidebar, because I work in the tech side of things with WEA, that's something you can look up that's specific to your phone. If you have a question about how to make sure it's enabled or look it up on your phone, talk to your carrier or take it into a store or something like that. I'm not going to claim to know every phone. It's somewhere buried in the settings, but usually if you can do a search in your settings for WEA, um, that's the setting that you want to have on. That's kind of like, it's brand agnostic. It's just the general, like, that's what goes out. It's based on the warnings I want to say that NWS puts out. So it's not NWS doesn't control WEA. It's just, this is an automated system that is like kind of like provided at no cost that piggybacks off of those warnings that come out from NWS.
Yeah.
And a little side note about apps, I would say find one that is easy for you to navigate, that you like, that probably doesn't have 5 billion ads that you can accidentally click on. There's a lot of good free ones out there. There's also a lot of ones where you pay like $1 to get rid of the ads, or $2 or something like that. Those are usually pretty good too. Make sure it can follow your location, and make sure that it does have like push notifications. That's a verbiage you want to look for, and set it for at least tornadoes, but probably also severe thunderstorms. And at least if you have those set for the warnings, I also personally recommend the watches, but at least if you have it set for those two warnings, you'll be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also some computer apps, paid and free. You can Google those. And then local radio stations, I would say, is like your absolute last ditch. If you're listening to like 810 radio or like 98.9, only when there's like the absolute like utmost like critical will they send out that like warning signal, that sound across the radio. But if that's all you got, it's all you got. I'm just saying that should be like your absolute last like fallback. All right, almost done here. Who can you trust for weather updates? It's kind of part and parcel with what we just suggested with how do you get it. But regardless of where you get it, just these are entities we would say you can absolutely trust. Obviously, NWS Kansas City, they're a local office. I trust them. Like that's what they do. They're professionals. The National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center, uh, they will provide information that's, nationwide, but still a good account to follow, especially if you're just kind of like updating yourself on things.
Mhm.
There's the local stations, Fox 4, KCTV 5, KMBC 9, and 41 Action News. That's our four major local stations. I don't know if everybody's from around here, but I would definitely say more often than not, at least as far as weather goes, usually you can trust those. Pick your flavor, pick whoever you like, whatever the personality is. I would say you're going to get the same information regardless. You just might like a personality to watch and inform you different. Local emergency agencies, um, depending on how a county or a city has things up, I would say as far as disaster stuff goes, that's where you want to try to get that information is the EMAs. And then, if you happen to know a local enthusiast or private meteorologist, forecaster, or chase team, again, vet their information. But if you like what they do or whatever, it's easier for you to disseminate that information. Awesome. Just make sure their info checks out.
Mhm.
Accuracy of forecasting. A lot of people, like to give crap to meteorologists. Like, oh, I'd love to have a job where I'm only right 50% of the time, but that's really not a thing anymore. For the areas that they talk about, the watches and warnings are often very detailed. This is from as far back as 2015, and this was a weird, like late December tornado type setup. And even though now this is more than 5 years ago, the technology is even better today. They put more satellites up. The algorithms run more accurately and more often. But you can see from these are all like watch and warning boxes, and they tie very closely to where they put those colors for the suspected impact in that outlook. And as we talked about early on, okay, but where am I? It's important to know, like I'm in Independence, which is in north central Jackson County, over here on the west side of the map. Jackson County is in west central Missouri. Jackson County and all the green communities on this map are a part of the NWS Kansas City / Pleasant Hill office. So NWSKC, they cover these green counties. They also cover some in Kansas. As far as Missouri goes, I just wanted to show. And then obviously there's Davenport, there's St. Louis, Paducah, Memphis, and Springfield. So depending on where you're at, you will want to follow a different office because different offices obviously only cover so many. I think our office covers it's like 42 or 46 counties or something like that. So it's a
Yeah.
lot. And then this is the national map for where all the different offices are and what counties they cover. So the name listed is what the NWS designation is. And as spotters, the intent here is to provide situational awareness. I know we've beat this horse until it's beyond dead, but sorry. If you decide to stay in your home and a tree falls on your house, or a storm surge catches you and you're now calling for help, there's no one that can respond to help you. That was a quote from a particular county sheriff during a news conference, and that's the criticality of following directions. So that quote is, if you are prescribing to these news sources and ways of getting information, they say this is the preparedness action you need to take if you're in this area. That's the expectation that needs to happen. Otherwise, you're like, oh well, whatever, or it doesn't apply to me, or it's never gonna, that might be like up the street or whatever, but that's not me. Well, you have a much higher propensity to become a statistic that way. If you really want to take the stuff seriously, then take the preparedness actions. It's way better to, you know, have acted and have been safe than to have not acted and not been safe. I feel like that's the catch there. So yeah, that's why it's important to follow directions given by emergency management, National Weather Service, broadcast meteorologists. Like we collectively, those of us in the like information side of things, don't just do it to hear ourselves talk. We do it to, and I know it sounds grandiose, but to save lives and property. That's the core of anybody that does weather information. That's the mission: save lives, protect property. and give people the best chance of mitigating a disaster before it even happens. So yeah, if you fail to heed proper preparedness actions, you could become a victim. You could wait days or longer before you're helped. Roads, power lines, internet, phone service, gas lines, they might be disrupted. You might not be able to do anything until enough stuff is cleared and fixed. So always preparing, always thinking ahead. That's, it's every bit as important as knowing what to do after a disaster is the lead up to it. Like, what do I need to do to be in the best shape so that if it does happen, I'm not behind the eight ball on this. Some things to know, some good terms we might not have covered. There's outlook, that's kind of the low risk. It's more of the general feel, more about timing. There's watch, which is like a little bit higher risk. Advisory, which can be like potentially dangerous or additional information to a watch or a warning. Warnings, which are life-threatening impact. And then emergency. So if there's like a tornado emergency versus a tornado warning, that is widespread, catastrophic type impact. Again, emergency, those are the absolute like worst case scenarios, and it doesn't necessarily have to equate to a tornado. It could be a flood emergency, which we've had here. Sometimes, like especially out west, they have wildfire emergencies. But it's the emergency is that cutover from, yeah, we know that what severe is, but this is like catastrophic level. This is like high population centers. Like there's a lot of lives at stake here if these actions aren't followed. Warnings, we should be pretty familiar with that. They can be associated with like flood, ice, blizzards, thunderstorms, tornadoes. If you get a warning, again, that's the time to act. Watches are the like, I should be thinking about it. I should probably get some things in order, make sure my ducks are in a row so that if I get to the warning phase, I'm ready to go. I'm not scrambling at the last second. And outlooks, again, that's the mundane. It's like the headlines, basically. Like, this is what we think, it's the timing. Here's our general outlook on the day. A PDS is also a thing to take note of. That is a particularly dangerous situation. And that's usually like a longer lead time. If they're like so sure on the confidence of a particular forecast, they might be like, this is going to be a PDS kind of a day. I know in Oklahoma and Texas and things like that, like this is a term that those folks are probably more intimately familiar with. But basically, if you hear PDS and it's like days in advance, like that should be an absolute like red flag. Like, man, they're already talking about the storm coming on Friday and today's only like Wednesday. Like, get it in gear, because that's not good. Like that should be like okay, I'm gonna go ahead before we even get to the day. I'm gonna go ahead and get as much done and ready as I can. Again, watch and warning. Watch is be prepared. Warning is take the action. I don't need to explain that, but in case there's been any confusion, I always like to throw that in there. Tornado sirens is my little soapbox. They are for outdoor warning purposes only. They're not meant to be heard indoors. So, hearing a siren, yeah, it's a signal to move indoors. It's a sign that you should be seeking additional information immediately. It does not mean that the threat is ended if the storm or if the siren stops. Also, if it sounds again, that does not mean it's an all clear. There's no such thing as an all clear. That means it's still going. Sirens are activated by city or county officials, not the National Weather Service. And I can tell you here internally for Independence, because I've helped develop and write the policy myself, if we continue to sound the sirens, we will only do it. Our sirens sound for 5 minutes. Then we give it a 10-minute cool down. So it's a 15-minute window. We sound the siren and it's at least for a 15-minute window. If the threat is still persistent, if we're still experiencing those, we will sound the sirens again. We give it that cool down because we can't just keep the sirens going indefinitely as it goes on. Sirens will burn out. It costs the taxpayers too much money. And that sound can get lost in the scheme of things. So we only signal it. It lasts about 5 minutes and then it's off. That doesn't mean the threat's over. That means at least within that time frame, we expect things to be at a certain threshold. And again, we will sound it again if we're still under that state. Every jurisdiction is different, but I can tell you accurately for sure in Independence, that is our policy. I would highly recommend contacting your local emergency management or county sheriff's office and asking what that policy is if you don't know. It's probably going to be pretty similar, but again, every jurisdiction might be a little different.
Yep. I think Oak Grove is pretty similar to that one.
Yeah. And this is just I'm not going to read through it, but James Spann, he basically harps on that is that, there is the thing called siren dependency where people, that is over the years, they've become expectant, like, oh yeah, well, I'm just going to hear a siren. No, you're not. There's a litany of reasons why you may or may not hear a siren. Like if you're indoors, if it's raining hard, if it's hailing, if you've got the TV blaring because you're watching whoever on TV or whatever show, you might miss that siren. So don't rely just on that. And I hope we've covered that so much so far as have multiple ways of being notified. It's very, very important. Here are some of those ways again: local TV and radio, the internet, outdoor sirens is part of that, friends and family, folks like us, NOAA weather radio, wireless emergency alerts like Pete was talking about, and weather apps. Lots of different ways here. This is a case of this tweet, this guy, his weather radio went off. He said, okay, cool. Got his family, got his baby out. Lo and behold, good thing he did, because this 2x4 came spearing through his wall. And I mean, if that was him or his wife, that would have impaled them. So have multiple ways of getting notified. You need to take a preparedness action. Take warnings seriously. They do save lives.
I promise.
Yeah, they do. And even though, we might like to joke about different things like this, it, I like to use humor and memes and graphics to kind of like point to something, but then I always try to follow it up with, something important here. Like, so as spotters, we've got to ensure that we're doing our part again to educate communities that we live in so we can be better weather aware and weather ready, both individually and as a collective. And if you can engage a person's humor, you might catch their attention long enough to impart something important. The images on the previous slide, those are just examples I've collected of some of the things that I've created, shared with folks, and they kind of poke fun at things, but with the intent of, outside of an emergency or whatever, it's kind of fun to talk about these things, but then also like follow it up with like a real talk point, like, okay, but here's the reality of that. So how do you individually impart knowledge to people? Think about that. Like whatever works for you to help spread that message, I think that's what counts. So if that's something you're comfortable with, if you feel like, you learned a lot from this, again, like if you hear some myth, call it out. Be a part of that. Be active in it. If you've got questions, ask. Get on Twitter, like ask a question to your local meteorologist. Like they answer a lot of questions that way. Like be a part of the process. If you've got a damage report, send it in, take a picture, take a video. We love that stuff. It all helps. Mm-hmm. If we can take a picture of something and be like, oh man, I'm getting like quarter size hail here. If I show that to Pete and be like, hey man, I know this thing's only like 15 minutes out from you. Take cover, bud. Like all of that information adds up and is beneficial. Yeah. Power outages, just some real quick things in case you don't know, if you are out on the road or if you have to get out after the fact. Red lights should be treated as no signal lights should be treated as a four-way stop. So if there's normally a signal lights, but they're all out because of power, treat the whole thing as a four-way stop. If there's a flashing red or flashing yellow, treat it as a stop sign. If it's green, obviously you can go, it should be working at that point, but pay attention, like either no lights, flashing red or flashing yellow. Usually there's some sort of power issue, and treat them as either like four-way stop or at least a stop sign. Power outages, they might disrupt all manner of different things, and that could be like a whole other discussion. I just wanted to, generators, keep refrigerators closed, disconnect appliances that you don't need plugged in, because even though they're plugged in and not on, they can draw power. There's a bunch of different things for power outages specifically you should be aware of, and take those considerations in mind when you're making your plans and filling out your go kits. Don't forget about pets. I've got a dog and 3 cats, and I know everybody in this household would be devastated if we lost any of them. So I have to plan for myself, my wife, my 2 kids, and my 4 pets. So, but keep them in mind, foods, medicine, shelters, thunder jackets, whatever to keep them safe, collars, leashes, their ID tags, anything you might need. Make sure that you're planning for them just the same, make a go kit for them just like you do for yourself. It's important. And then just some real general kind of like high level to kind of follow everything up here. Safety and preparedness for all hazards, which is kind of the emergency management approach. Make a communication plan and practice it. I know I talked about my communication plan is to use texting and to also text my dad if it's that bad. So at least the information gets out to somebody in a place that can possibly help, or at least get information elsewhere for me. But what if you can't use your cell phone? What if you can't use the internet? What are your backup plans? I have ham radios. I know some local frequencies and things like that. That's an option for me. Keep at least one, preferably more, out of town contacts for the reasons I listed. Have your go bag stocked for everyone in your household, and that also includes pets. Each person, each pet should have a kit of some sort. Now, if you have one big kit or whatever that you put them all in, or a big storage box or something, awesome. As long as it's in the place you need it, that's what counts. You don't want to have to lug that thing around up and down. I've got concrete stairs. I would fall and bust my face open if I tried to move all that stuff. Again, there's tons of videos. We will try to follow up with some great go bag stuff here in the next few days. Stay informed always. Like I mentioned in that one slide, well, what weather to pay attention to? All of it. What information? Take it all in. Make sure if it applies to you, awesome. If it doesn't, to discard it, but at least you're staying informed. That's really the key. Double check that information. Disasters mean things are changing constantly. So make sure that Facebook post that you're looking at isn't the one from 6 hours ago. It's the one from like 30 minutes ago. Make sure that you're taking that stuff into account. Check your NWS weather radio's batteries and settings. Make sure 1, it's got batteries, 2, it's plugged in, and 3, it's programmed correctly. Same with phone apps. Again, make sure it follows your location. It's set up for push notifications, and you've got your sound on. Get in the mindset of like, what else can you think of that might be good for preparedness or a safety action? Not just weather, but anything. Like what are scenarios that you might face in your work building, in your office, in your home, your apartment, out at the park, at Home Depot, or at the grocery store. Like when you go places this spring and summer, think about, okay, well, if I was here and XYZ were to happen, let's just say tornado. Tornado is an easy one to at least get in that mindset. If I'm at Hy-Vee and a tornado is coming, what would I do here? What are my options here? Look at that. Take a look around and figure it out. Maybe the store has a plan. It's probably not very well advertised. Maybe you have to ask a manager. Favorite weather app, if you had to choose one, Radar Scope, hands down, absolutely 100%. That app, I feel like that app for me tells me everything I need to know with radar. However, my other apps that are not the paid apps would be One Weather and Weather Underground. I like both of those for different reasons, but those are also very good. Yep. And that's One Weather with a 1 and then the word. Like that. And then you might see it listed as Underground or Weather Underground, which is a subsidiary of the Weather Channel. So it's good quality information.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
Almost lastly here, a good mindset is before I do anything, I ask myself, would an idiot do that? And if the answer is yes, I don't do that thing. That's basically the whole purpose of this class here, is like, just think through it. And if it sounds like a good thing to do, make that plan, do that thing. If it sounds dumb, if it's not going to protect you, if it's not going to protect your family, don't do it. Do whatever makes sense to you. And then again, just summing it all up, maintain situational awareness. Conditions are always changing. Always have 3+ ways of receiving weather alerts. Have a plan, know the plan, practice the plan, use the plan. Communicate clearly. If you are, even if you're just talking to your family, if you're talking to friends, if you're submitting a report to whoever, us, NWS, communicate clearly, be precise. What's happening? Where is it happening? And what, like the who, what, when, where, why. If you can nail those things out real quick, that's awesome. But it's also accurate and timely. That's the key here. Like, we have to know the when it happened. Otherwise, if you send us like a damage picture, I'm be like, holy crap, when was that? Oh, it's from last week. Okay, got it. Please provide that context.
True.
But yeah, this is the time. Anything that we didn't cover, any burning weather questions that you had, anything we've covered so far, about us, about the team, about our EOCs, anything tangentially related, like unmute, whatever, like this is it. I know we ran a little long. We covered a lot of questions and stuff though, and some sidebars. So I'm just going to click through some things, but I'm opening the floor at this point for anybody that's got anything here.
Yep.
I promise there's not any stupid questions either. I've
Yep,
heard
no
about all
stupid
of it,
questions
and I
there.
would rather, if it's a legit question that you have, I want to legit answer it. So
Yep.
but yeah, if there's no further questions, this is it. We've covered everything. And that's why I want to just open the floor. If there's anything else, something that you weren't quite sure of, whatever, I want to I want to take it, got some stuff here. Oh yeah, absolutely. I hope that even if you just learn like one small thing, that it's something that makes a difference to you guys. Yeah, I know a lot of this is redundant, but that's the thing, is that a lot of people don't think in these ways. And that's why I've kind of built the presentation the way that I've built it, is that there's really not a lot to it. We covered a lot, yeah, but really at the core of it, there's not a lot. There's just those kind of bullet points at the end there. These right here. Situational awareness. Things change. Make sure you can get ways of notifying yourself of the change. If you're doing that stuff, I mean, you're gonna be so far ahead of the rest of the public, and you'll be in a lot better position to stay safe.
Absolutely.
But yeah, hit us up anytime. Our social down there, Twisted Skies WX, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And we always try to respond as best we can. Like I said, I've got my wife who keeps tabs on if I haven't replied to something. She's like, hey, get on it. But all right, guys. Well, I will work on the next couple of days when I've got some time to try to get this up on YouTube. It'll literally just be from the time I said, okay, we're going to go ahead and start till now. I'll get it posted. So if you know somebody that might find this interesting now that you've been through it, point them to the YouTube link. Once we share it, it'll be public, so anybody can access it. Come to us with questions anytime. I can't say that enough. We really just want to, Pete and I want to educate people. That's not to say people are stupid. There's a lot of things when it comes to disaster preparedness and emergency preparedness that people just aren't used to thinking through those things. And it can be scary. It's a lot. It can be overwhelming. So like, start small and build on that. But yeah, hopefully you guys have a good day. I got to go prepare for my oldest's overnight. And yeah, let us know if you've got anything, questions, pictures, videos. We'd love to see all of it, hear from you guys anytime. So stay safe out there. Thank you so much for coming, and
Thank you.
we'll see you later.